What's the worst way you've seen an employee screwed over by the company? We had RIFs, or reductions in force, back in 2008 when they started in February in the Midwest. One girl was escorted out of the secure area, told she was gone and to leave the building. She was okay with being RIFed, however it's February in the Midwest and it's cold outside. All of her stuff was inside the secure area and they wouldn't allow her back in. They wouldn't get her stuff for her. So she had to stand out in 20 degrees Fahrenheit weather until someone she knew would call a buddy to get her hat, coat, purse, and car keys. I worked for an oil company and lived through mass redundancies when the oil went belly up. They sent out a list of positions which were being made redundant with numbers for how many people currently held that role and how many they were cutting it to. So for example, if it said buyers current 4, consultation 3, you knew that if you were a buyer, you'd be under scrutiny and 25% of your team would be gone soon. I sat at my desk and opened the email. Looked for my position and no redundancy for me. The girl next to me opened hers and saw position, current 1, consultation 0. That's how she learned she'd lost her job. Oof, I can think of 2 examples. There was a fire drill, and upon returning, it was discovered that not everybody returned. Apparently, it was a literal fire drill where some people were told that they'd been let go, and this was their way of having them leave the building. The other example is my dad, who'd been with a huge multinational company that tried to fire him a week or so before his 30-year work anniversary. Fortunately for him, the manager forgot to give him the necessary paperwork on time, and he was fired but made it to the 30-year mark, which has extremely heavy implications on pension and retirement. Was that on purpose? I hope your manager intentionally forgot to give your dad the paperwork until the 30-year mark. It was not a favor where the paperwork was intentionally delayed. My dad and the manager butted heads, and the manager was part of the sweep to force out the older, costlier employees. My dad knew that the retirement package was coming and required, and opted to not remind the manager. In the end, he got really lucky that the management was determined to force him out but failed to make it happen before the critical 30-year mark due to the internal red tape. My God, I too thought that there was someone being helped out by a kindly old boss for a second there. I guess though it's even more satisfying to get a sweet deal out of your company and then make fun of your arch-enemy whose incompetence handed it to you. Haha. A colleague of mine was flown from his office in the field to headquarters under the pretense of a leadership meeting and fired immediately once he arrived. He was on a plane back home 2 hours later. The boss didn't feel like traveling, I guess. In 2008, my company had a huge RIF of 100 or so people. The day that it happened was just terrible. I walked into the conference room and found the HR guy crying in the dark. 30 days later, they let him go as well. 2008 sucked. I'm just an IT guy, so I don't always know the whole story, but it feels bad locking someone's account on their PC and having them find out that way. Then of course, moments later, an HR person shows up at their desk. I had a friend years ago and she worked security at First Union Bank's main IT campus. She told me the way they let people go is they'd come in to badge in through the door and their card would not work. Out came HR and security, where they'd escort the person to their desk to get their things and then walk them right out the door. She told me about 3 weeks after this practice started, one Saturday night at around 5 p.m. their ATM system crashed and it took them all night to recover. She told me she thinks someone left them a going-away gift. I used to work in a warehouse, and one time an employee got seriously injured. His arm and leg was seriously messed up. The guy worked out a lot, so management pulled him into the office and began to speak to him. So, you hurt your arm at the gym and now you want to blame us. He had been injured when a pallet of heavy things literally tumbled over near him. If he didn't move right away, he could have easily gotten crushed. Management thought it was a scam. Do you know what insurance fraud is? Tell us the truth. We know everything. You can't lie to us. The guy was stunned. He wanted to use his health insurance, but the management wasn't hearing it. This continued for some time, a few hours at least. I guess someone overheard because 3 guys from the union showed up mad as hell, like completely livid. There was screaming, shouting, and then one mentioned that perhaps we should get the Department of Labor and the other insurance company involved. I guess that was enough to convince him. He let the employee use his insurance and things went on for a while. Apparently this guy had a habit of doing this to everyone who was injured. Injury happens, then a day later, screaming in the office. He literally accused someone of working with a broken arm for 2 weeks before going to the hospital. I think someone either reported him or the union stepped in, because he's luckily disappeared. Allow me to post a happy story involving layoffs and HR. But first, a little background. Where I live, employers could give out temporary contracts for a total of 3 years. After that, they had to let you go or offer a permanent contract. So you work for somewhere for 3 years and a single second, it would equal a permanent contract. This girl was on her 3rd year, with all signs pointing towards a permanent. Her evaluations were through the roof. She was one of the more productive workers in the department, good rapport with the customers, co-workers liked her, and she loved working there. It should have been a done deal. However, 2 months before she hits 3 years, the company announces a downsizing. As part of this downsizing, all temporary workers will not have their contracts renewed or made permanent. Department head tries to argue with HR, citing everything I mentioned above, but they can't do anything. Downsizing like this is part of labor law as well as the CBA, and they literally can't make exceptions. But they can offer her transition help, like helping her find a new job. The girl doesn't want to do it, but she's convinced by the department head to do it anyway, so she brings her CV and the proof of all the training she's had and meets up with the HR rep. HR rep stops at one of her internships she did right before she came to her current job, and asks her a lot of questions about it. Then she asks her a lot of questions about how long she's been working for the company. Then he steps out for a good 10 minutes before returning with the head of the HR department. They ask her to again confirm her employment history. Turns out the company she'd interned at was taken over roughly a year before by the company she now worked for. Also, internships count as work experience, and when the takeover was finalized, the payroll was transferred on a one-to-one basis, including past experience. So officially, her employment with our company was not 2 years, 11 months, but 3 years, 2 months. As a result, her previously temporary contract was now permanent by law, and she wasn't laid off. Step 1. Owner or founder sells the company to a big corporation, makes a huge profit, and buggers off to the tropics. Step 2. New management starts to fire people, over 100, in the first 6 months. Step 3. New management then makes the place so miserable people start losing it and quitting, all within the second 6 months. And finally, the place gets so bad, employees threaten to unionize, the company says if they do, all jobs will be terminated and services exported to India. It's the worst crap I've ever seen. Screw big corporations. I've seen and heard about this happening so many times, and I don't know if it's just people so hopeless that they couldn't manage a glass of water at a desert market, or if it's just megacorps purposefully buying and then running down the competition to stay on top. I worked almost 100% on one of the major projects at my company. It was one of only a couple of whales that was keeping the lights on. This was during the major oil crash around 2014 or so. The project manager booked a long vacation way in advance, and the client decided at the last minute that all the work needed to be revisited. Not by our fault, just compliance with a new regulatory procedure. This was actually great news because it gave a lot of people work to do, which was pleasantly surprising news when layoffs are happening weekly, so we couldn't say no. A more senior co-worker stepped up and took over. Everything went great and we got the deadline in on time, but it took a lot of overtime on their part. They really came through. I and the other co-workers mentioned them by name during performance reviews to commend them. They were laid off a couple of weeks later. It wasn't announced. They stopped informing the staff of layoffs because apparently it was hurting morale. I was already planning on leaving to go to grad school, but I could have changed my mind up until that point. I pretty much just mentally checked out, ignored everyone, and counted down the days until I left. Just remember that if you work for a huge company, you owe them absolutely nothing beyond your scheduled hours. The people deciding your fate could be entire tiers above whatever low-level manager you answer to, and you'll probably never see their face or even know their name. You might get dropped on an impulse to make their spreadsheet numbers look better for their next meeting. My college roommate was a temp in an HR office for college credit. She came home one night absolutely disheveled, makeup smeared, heels in hand, just rough. In a nutshell, her supervisor made her participate in firing a woman for creating a hostile work environment. Seems cut and dry, right? Turns out the hostility in question was directed at a man the woman accused of inappropriate conduct with her daughter. The woman obviously went bat-crap crazy, crying, begging to keep her job, the works. Told my roommate the entire story about how she'd dated the guy for dark side. Naturally, the mum threatened to kill the guy. The HR supervisor wasn't having it, and had security escort the woman out. My roommate asked the supervisor if she thought the mum was telling the truth. The supervisor, cold as ice, "Probably. We hire some really suspicious people. She really shouldn't have left her daughter alone with him." That broke something in my roommate, and she dropped her business program 3.5 years in. I think she graduated with a degree in biology or something 2 years later. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Sears, Canada. Going through bankruptcy, many employees were laid off with no severance while the executives were getting six-figure bonuses. Those bonuses could have covered many employees' severance. Made an employee come in at 6:30 for the morning rush hour only to tell her to leave after 10 minutes because they were a bit overstaffed. I mean, at least give her 2 hours for her troubles. The warehouse I used to work for was really bad for this. They had a shuttle system that would run to a couple of towns 45 minutes to an hour away, and some people lived within 10 to 15 minutes. The perk of the shuttle was that it went to the low-income areas and picked up a ton of people who would otherwise not be able to get to work. Well, the shuttle only ran before and after shifts, not hourly like a bus system. Supposedly, the warehouse would only get the product numbers at like 5 a.m. when shifts started at 6. So when time rolled around, they'd tell us we were overstaffed and to go home. Their system was to break it down by which shifts and departments had left last time. Given that the shuttle people were the majority, they were most likely the ones sent home. After roll call and figuring out who was leaving, the shuttles will have gone and all the shuttle people were stuck in the cafeteria for the full 10-hour shift, unpaid, until the shuttles dropped off the 4 p.m. shift. It was a huge stink for the longest time. Finally, the warehouses shelled out the extra money to lengthen the shuttle contract times. I think it ultimately ran at the beginning, middle, and end of the shift. My Fortune 500 company was going through downsizing years back. Everyone knew their turn would be coming, so it wasn't the best of environments. One woman who had been with the company for 20 years was applying for jobs just to see what was out there, but really wanted to stay with the current company. She ended up getting an offer elsewhere. So she approached our manager at the time and told him the situation and asked for advice. The boss basically told her nothing was on the horizon but to do what was best for her. So she turns her notice in. The very next day, the RIFs were announced, the entire department was being let go except for that one manager. Everyone gets a severance package except for the lady who put in notice the day before. She lost 40 weeks of pay. She was going to get 2 per year worked. The boss knew the RIFs were coming. He could have advised her to wait a day in a roundabout way, so screw you, Derek. On the bright side, she had a new job right away while the rest of us took some time off and competed for the same open jobs in the area. Well, I hope that boss got ruthlessly canned with way less benefits than his time and service should have permitted later as well. I can't imagine being that callous with someone I'd worked with for so long. Although if the company was willing to lay off that many people, perhaps he'd have had the same treatment if his superiors found out he could have saved them 40 weeks of pay. I still say to do the right thing and go with your old colleagues. There was this guy who came to work for us about a year ago. This is hard manual labor, and the guy had quit slinging substances on the street to come and make an honest living to support his family. He was having trouble dealing with it at first, but he adjusted and ended up being one of the hardest workers on the floor. Always working those 12-hour shifts, staying busy the whole time. Anyway, he works with us for a good long while before his 19-year-old daughter dies suddenly in her sleep. He, of course, gets a few days off. They probably would have given him more time, but he really couldn't afford to miss any work. The guy held together so damn well while he was at work, man. You could tell for sure he was going through some stuff, but he stayed busy still. Well, the next week, I guess he decided he needed a little more time off, but he didn't call out and just stayed home for 2 days. After returning from that 2 days, he was immediately escorted out of the building and fired. I moved to another state and got a job at an alternative school for kids who had been kicked out of public school for emotional and behavioral issues. The company spent a few hundred hours training me, and I learned a lot more on the job. It was difficult at times, but I enjoyed the work and the people I worked with. After a few months, I felt comfortable in my role. Then, for some reason still unknown to me, the bosses wanted me gone. I was called into a meeting with 2 supervisors who said that we were now overstaffed, which is a lie. We had 3 vacancies, and that I had an exciting opportunity to move to another program. They wanted me to move to our sister program where you work one-on-one in a public school, which can suck if you have a kid who's really tough to work with. And in that program, they wanted me to be a sub or floater, so I could get a text at 5 a.m. telling me I had to go to a school an hour away to work with an emotionally unstable kid I'd never met before. So I thought about it the next day and told my supervisor that I wanted to stay where I was, but that I'd be flexible and go to the other program for a few months if they needed me there, or be a permanent one-on-one with a kid, just not a permanent floater. I didn't hear anything for a week, and then I got called into another meeting with both supervisors and the head director. The head director says that the other program would be better for my professional development, which is bullcrap, and then asks me to tell her 3 of my professional goals that I'm working on, clearly trying to catch me off guard. I make up something and then tell her my reasons for wanting to stay. I didn't hear anything for a couple more weeks, but the bosses are crappy and begin sending me emails for any mistakes I make that could easily have been said in person. For example, another staff and I were dealing with an escalated kid who'd already bit me, and I was tapping my foot while watching him. The director came up behind me and loudly said, "You need to stop doing that in front of the kid." Then she had one of my supervisors write me an email the next day telling me I had to be conscious of tapping my foot or drumming my fingers, which is true but doesn't require an email. Then I got called in to another meeting with the director and 2 supervisors who tell me that I'm getting moved to the other program. I gave my 2 weeks notice on the spot, which made my coworkers think I was badass, but didn't help the fact that I needed a new job. My director then still forced me to go to the other program for my last 2 weeks, so I didn't get the goodbye ceremony or anything at the alternative school and could do very little at the other program since they knew I wouldn't be there long. I ended up getting a job at a preschool with a much better boss, but it still frustrates me to think about the whole experience. I think the way I was fired by my last company was pretty crappy. I worked in marketing for a small company. They were having a lot of problems and there were crazy internal power struggles which led to my firing. Basically, crap just rolls downhill, I guess. The boss wasn't meeting sales goals because the salespeople that they'd hired and were buddies with couldn't sell water to someone dying of thirst and needed someone to blame. I went to the Christmas party and had the next 2 days off. The second day I had off, I got a generic email saying my services were no longer needed. The other 2 people in my department got the same email. Turns out everyone else at the party of about 20 people knew me and one of the other people, my supervisor, were going to get fired. The company's HR person, a real professional, had told a couple of others that we were going to get fired and word had spread. The third person who got fired was lined up to get my supervisor's job, but got drunk at the party and told the boss it was a mistake to fire us, so she ended up getting fired too. Looking back, not only was it crappy to fire us a week before Christmas, but also crappy to put us in a room of our co-workers who all knew that we were about to get fired. Not an HR worker, but last week 3 employees were fired in the company I work in. The lady in charge of terminating people was known in the company as Death, because when she called you into a room, stuff was gonna go down. She fired 2 people following our ridiculous protocol, which basically kicks people out and then someone else has to pick up their stuff from the desk and take it to them outside. We usually fire them first thing in the morning so they don't waste a whole day of work for a company they no longer work for. After doing those 2 terminations, her boss called her into that room and fired her as well. I think this is why you can lean towards being loyal to your coworkers rather than your company. Because even if you do exactly what they want for you, they won't have any loyalty to you and you could immediately be following them out the door. First-hand witness because it was me. I worked at a biotech startup for a year, saved them tons on in-house development of assay reagents and had nothing but positive feedback. One of my coworkers was let go due to budgetary concerns and was given a very generous severance. About a month later, my father passed away and I took a couple of days. When I come back, I'm asked to stay late for a few days, and then on a Tuesday I'm told I'm being furloughed until they get a grant approved, but would for sure be brought back on. Lost health insurance, no severance offered, and they'd already cancelled my ID badge and parking pass. Couldn't get back in to get my wallet and keys and whatnot, during which time my car was towed. Just remember, HR is not your friend. Their purpose is to protect the company, not the people. I was amazed to see how many employees think that going to HR to complain is like visiting your high school guidance counselor and getting help with your career. HR is there to keep the company out of employment lawsuits, and the second you leave their office, the manager is called in with a full report on what you said. It messes with the manager too, because it means they could be causing issues and now need a closer bit of monitoring. So, if you like your boss and had an issue you were too scared to raise and used HR instead, or didn't give a basically fair boss the chance to try and fix the situation before you complained, just know you put yourself on notice and them too. I worked for a company on contract, in HR if you believe it. It was a crappy company, so 6 weeks before the contract ended, I went to the boss and said that I was going to leave at the end of my contract. For the next 6 weeks, I was persona non grata in the HR department. I was removed from their group email list, I wasn't told about meetings, and they went on 2-day training outside the office and I wasn't told. I arrived at work to an empty HR department for 2 days. On my last day, I was saying goodbye to people around the office and my boss comes down and demands that I come to a meeting and walks away. After 6 weeks of basically no contact, I was wondering why. Someone in another department said that they'd planned a goodbye party for me. They treated me like crap for 6 weeks and then brought a gift, cake, and balloons. I said, F that. Snuck up to my desk, got my coat, left the building, and drove away. Apparently, they'd sat there for an hour paging me throughout the building before they realized I'd left. Good thing was, I didn't need them there for a reference, as a friend of mine owned his own company and gave me one saying I'd worked there for a year. What's the worst thing you've been wrongfully accused of? Stealing money from work. My register was over $100 short one day. My boss made me undo all of my pockets and went through my backpack. I had to take off my shoes and socks in front of him. He had me shake out my clothes in front of him. It wasn't like he made me take them off, but in the middle of the kitchen he starts yelling at me to shake out my shirt and my undies in front of the whole class. He wanted to see my car, but I insisted that I hadn't left the restaurant. It just sucked. I was humiliated. I'd worked there for years without a single incident. I wouldn't say I was friends with the boss, but we were certainly friendly and on great terms. I get that he needed to check everything out in case something happened, but throwing all of my stuff out of my purse onto the ground and yelling for me to shake out my clothes wasn't necessary. A former friend worked as a barback at a family-owned pub, and money started disappearing during his shifts. The owner saw that on the days money went missing, he was the only one consistently scheduled. They approached him about the money and asked if he was having financial trouble. He denied taking the money. The owners were convinced that he was the thief and started treating him like crap, rescheduling him at the last minute, cutting his hours, and giving him crap jobs. They complained about him to the other employees and to the regulars. They decided to put cameras behind the register to catch him in the act and told no one. The next time money went missing, they checked the footage only to find out that their daughter and her girlfriend were the ones stealing. They had the run of the pub, so seeing them come in on their days off wasn't unusual. They set him up. The messed up thing is they fired him anyway because they were embarrassed by all the crap talking they did and wanted to keep quiet about their daughter's theft. I was accused of mistreating a minor by a neighbor. I'd been babysitting my sister. I was 22 at the time, she was 3, and she was going through that silly phase most young children go through where they just want to run around in the buck all the time. My neighbor knocked on the door while I was cooking dinner. My sister streaked to the door and opened it before I could get there. The neighbor saw a buck-wild young kid and a grown man, assumed the worst, and called the cops and then called the other neighbors. The cops came out, talked to me, talked to my sister, called our mum and talked to her, talked to the neighbor. They realized nothing was going on and apologized for the inconvenience and left. Unfortunately, by then, the neighbor had spread the rumor throughout the apartment complex and people being people believed the worst. I became a pariah in that neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, the rumor spread throughout the town. It ended up making my life hell there, and I had to move to a different county to leave the rumors behind. I know a lot of parents with kids who seem to go through this stage. It's generally treated more with amusement than concern, but it can make for some awkward situations when your toddler decides it's time for a public display. Doesn't usually go this badly, though. Another story with similar wild accusations to follow. I was essentially accused of inappropriate behavior as a pre-kindergarten teacher. They always questioned me if I'd have to be in the room with the children alone. I was the opener, so I had 5 to 10 kids in the mornings before anyone else got there, even though it was literally part of my job. Parents would subtly try to ask me this kind of stuff or accuse, "You're the only one here in the mornings. Shouldn't there be a woman with you?" Just stuff like this says they don't trust me with their children. Not as bad as some people here, but it still hurts when all I wanted to do was teach children and help them learn. That's why, as a male, I'd never get into any kind of child-related care where I was the only one with them. I remember when I used to play ball at the park with my dog. I'd bring a bucket of balls and a bat and hit them off for him to retrieve. One day, a kid, about 7 or 8, comes over and asks to play with us. Me, being the friendly guy I am, says sure and hit him some ground balls. Next thing I know, this lady, his mom I'm sure, comes running over screaming at me about stealing her child or something. I was so embarrassed and it made me assess situations so that I won't be alone with any children, because apparently all guys out alone are sick freaks. On Christmas Eve, I was accused of stealing a customer's credit card after I left work for the night. It felt horrible for my team to have to deal with that on Christmas Eve of all days. The lady had come in to return an item earlier in the day. It was one of our Christmas special items that we don't normally stock. I told her this as she was still undecided about returning it. She went out to talk to her husband who was sitting in the car outside. Eventually, she decided to return it. I processed the return like normal. I didn't touch her card at any time. She put her card through the FPOS terminal. I had her sign a receipt to say that she had returned the item. I gave her a return receipt which shows FPOS refund on it. And that was that. Later that night after I'd left, the husband came back. He was furious. The lady was with him, but she was quiet. He was yelling and throwing a massive tantrum, saying that the girl who served her, me, had stolen her credit card. He was demanding an apology from me or my team. Luckily, we have security cameras which face directly on the counter. They're very clear pictures. It was very, very obvious that the wife put her credit card back in her purse. Plus, a receipt will not be printed out if a card is still in the terminal, which meant she wouldn't have been able to sign anything if she had left it in there. The manager was not happy about him accusing me of this. He didn't get his apology. This reminds me of an incident involving myself a while back. I'd gone through a drive-thru, ordered food, and paid. I was on autopilot at the time. I received my drinks through the window and couldn't figure out where my credit card went. I informed the girl in the window and she checked her workspace while I dug through my car. She apologized for the incident and the manager gave me a card with her name and number to reach them if I couldn't find my card. Well, I stopped in the parking lot for a bit, searched some more, and decided to head home. On the drive home, I got a call from a man that told me he had reviewed their security camera and she had given me my card back. Before I could thank him for checking, he insisted the clerk did not steal the credit card. I never made that claim and it surprised me how defensive he was over the issue. He told me I could come to review the footage myself at a later date if I didn't believe him. When I got home, I went through the sides of the seats, under the seats, etc. until I did find my card. What happened is, when she handed me the drinks, she stuck my card between them, and the card fell down the side of the center console. I didn't realize this at the time. I called them back to let them know I found my card just because of the potential drama I'd caused, even though I was calm and unaccusingly polite throughout the ordeal. It was pretty silly to begin with. I realize now this might happen more often than I'd think, and people are stupid and easy to accuse. Stabbing a kid with a pair of scissors. I tried to explain the kid was bullying and attempted to steal my scissors but cut himself on them in the process. Got suspended by the principal anyway because the school didn't want to take sides. I was 18 and home for my lunch break one day when 3 detectives showed up at my door. Apparently, our IP address had been used to post illegal material containing children to a website. Not knowing my rights adequately at the time, I let the cops in and let them inspect my computer. They found LimeWire on it and decided I was a suspect. By this time, I'd called both of my parents at least 10 times, but neither were picking up. I let them take my computer so they could have the lab do a more thorough inspection of my hard drive. Expectedly, they found nothing and either decided not to or were unable to get a warrant for the rest of the computers and digital storage devices in the house. The worst thing about the whole ordeal was my parents asking me repeatedly over the next week if I did it, and if I did, they'd get me help. That freaking hurt. I'm already freaking the frick out about cops taking my computer and digging through it, and now my parents think I'm guilty. They didn't seem to accept that I didn't do anything wrong until we got my computer back and we were no longer being investigated. My plan after the fact was to not tell anyone about what happened, because nobody needs to know that the cops came knocking on my door looking for someone distributing that kind of material. My dad decided to tell any of my friends who came over about what happened as a warning about security. Our Wi-Fi was unsecured until after this incident. Being 18-year-old dudes, they made it a running joke that I was into that stuff. They're still my friends because I know they weren't trying to actually be jerks, but those jokes still hurt. They actually mostly stopped after a couple of months, and I think the last time I heard one of them mention it was 2 years after the fact, 4 years ago. Oosh, I mean, there's a lot of accusations in this group about misbehavior with young people. I guess it's a good thing that people take the issues so seriously, but it looks like it can really wreck your life if untrue accusations come your way. My mum accused me of eating her candy bar when I was 8, even though my sister ate it. My sister was 10 and wouldn't fess up, so we had to stand in a corner for 6 hours until my dad came home and I started bawling and my sister finally told him she ate it. He yelled at my mum for punishing me. Love you, Dad. 6 hours for a candy bar? Jesus Christ. Yeah, my mum is serious about her chocolate, and she's a witch. My wife was arrested while out shopping with our 3-month-old. As she walked into the store, a girl who was exiting offered her a shopping cart. My wife accepted and went about her business. A few minutes later, the girl found her in the store and asked if she had left her, the girl's, wallet in the cart. My wife said no and figured that was the end of it. Evidently after that, the girl went to store security who let her watch all the recorded security video and they saw my wife tucking something into her diaper bag right after accepting the cart. It was her phone, by the way. The girl ran back across the store screaming at my wife, "I know you did it! They have it on camera! I called the cops!" etc. So my wife keeps trying to de-escalate the situation, but the girl's having none of it. Then the store's customer service desk, where they ended up to discuss things, holds up the girl's wallet. "Is this yours?" The girl grabs it and confirms it's hers and departs without an apology. Then the cops show up and in their opinion, my wife stole the wallet and hid it in the store where someone else picked it up and turned it in. So they arrest her for felony theft. After trying to force her at length to confess, threatening our child, swearing at her, among other things, eventually she pulled out her camera to record them and that's when they shut up, cuffed her and charged her. It took us several months and a hefty lawyer fee to get access to the security video, which the cops weren't required to turn over to us until the day of her hearing. But once we had it, it only took 20 minutes to prove exactly what did happen with the wallet. It was dropped by the girl before she even offered the cart. Another customer picked it up and brought it to customer service before my wife even entered the store. 5 months, $3,500 later, the DA called it a case of mistaken identity and dropped charges. During that time, my wife couldn't apply for jobs. She's a mental health counselor and it would have shown up in her background check, and had to take several days away from our very young child, including being detained for over 4 hours for the arrest itself. No apology from the DA, the cops, the store, or the girl. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was 18 years old, my cousin came over one day and brought me truck parts that he said he'd brought for my birthday and they'd finally arrived. I thanked him wholeheartedly because it must have been almost $1,000 in parts and I really needed them. I installed them all into my truck and went on my merry way. Fast forward about a month later and I'm cleaning my truck and 2 police cars roll up to my house. They read me my rights and explain to me that my cousin told them that I told him to steal a credit card and buy me truck parts, which is a screwing load of nonsense. I told them that I had no part involved with it, and that should be the end of it. But still, I did receive stolen products and still had to go to court for it. My cousin got a slap on the wrist and community service because he was 17, but since I was an adult, I had to be charged. I was able to get it down to only a misdemeanor and no jail time, again, all while I never did a single fricking thing. Dealt with it on my record for about 2 years and was able to get it expunged. F the American justice system. I was able to forgive him because I know we all make mistakes, but what really killed me is that his mother, my aunt, said I was a bad influence on him and I deserved it. That hurt me the most. The school district was hit by a virus. I think it was ransomware, although that doesn't match up chronologically, back in late 2007. Once they cleaned up the mess, they traced it back to someone with a flash drive in our computer lab during the period our class was using them. My 5th grade teacher, who had it in for me, ranted me out in front of the class regarding my utter stupidity and carelessness. That hurt, although she'd done it before and would do it again. I wasn't to blame, however, as I'd lost my flash drive a couple of weeks before the virus incident, and ended up finding it a month or so in a small backpack pocket, completely soaking in a carton of soy milk I'd also forgotten. Oddly, no other consequences, which makes me think she was bullcrapping. I was accused of unwanted advances on a girl at a party at my university. I was drunk as heck that night, and so was my good friend who I was dancing with. This girl had a boyfriend who I knew of, so I wasn't even hitting on her, we were just drunk and dancing. Suddenly, one of the guards grabs me by the arm and kicks me out and tells me that one of the stage guards had called him due to me bothering this girl. I spoke to her the day after and she had no idea what they were talking about. The worst part about this was I actually knew the guy who kicked me out. He told me to go grab something to eat at McDonald's and come back in an hour or two, since I was really drunk, which I can own up to. I assume he knew me well enough to know I would never do what I was accused of, but it still ruined that night. Back when my school's Twitter started posting raunchy SpongeBob memes, my teacher accused me of hacking into the Twitter account and doing it myself. He probably thought so because I've done sorta similar things before, but not to that extent, and nothing that could be considered hacking. They eventually figured out that the student responsible for running the account mixed up the school's account and one of her personal ones. The narrator has said dozens of times throughout his life that adult images of SpongeBob are no laughing matter, and feels vindicated by the previous story. Think before you Photoshop off those square pants, people. I was accused of stealing a puppy. This'll be long. My boyfriend, now husband, and I were home one Friday afternoon when our dog started barking incessantly, which is unusual for him. I go outside and there's a Labrador puppy playing around in our front yard. No one is around. I've lost a dog before and know how that feels, so the first thing I do is put him on a leash and walk him around our neighborhood to see if we run into anyone looking for him. No dice. It's getting late in the day and I have to start getting ready for work. I tie him out in our front yard so if anyone's looking for him, they can spot him and then call the animal shelter to report him found. But I don't initially bring him in. In 2009, I lost a blue heeler. While frantically searching for him in multiple counties, I emailed a lady who I thought was the current director of a local animal shelter. She had since left the position and was very candid with me about the shady things that sometimes go down in animal shelters. I'd heard some stories about possibly unethical practices being carried out at my own county shelter, and took her advice to heart. So I was wary of dropping this puppy off at this shelter even though I'd since moved to a different county. My boyfriend was sick that weekend and was not in the mood to watch this 4-month-old puppy in our unpuppy-proofed house. I didn't want to take him to the shelter. I felt confident that we could find the puppy's family, but I was scheduled to work the next 3 days and had very little say in the matter, since I wouldn't be able to actually watch the puppy. My boyfriend drove him to the shelter that evening. He signed a paper relinquishing the pup, but didn't get a copy. The next Friday, I have a voicemail from the owner of the puppy saying that the shelter had given her my number. She wants to pick her puppy up. What in the heck? I call her back and tell her that I'd found her puppy and alerted them that he'd been found and then taken in. She didn't believe me. Fast forward, she starts talking about legal action. She's accusing me of theft of her very expensive and well-bred Labrador. I didn't let on that I know labs and that she didn't have much of a pup from a confirmation standpoint, but I digress and not that it matters. I keep my cool. I've never so much as smoked a cigarette in my life, so I wasn't feeling very intimidated. So I'm at work again and I'm complaining to my coworkers about this predicament that I'm in. The shelter is acting like they've never heard from us. This woman filed a police report against me. I show my coworker a picture that I'd taken of the puppy. Her friend adopted it 3 days after it was turned in. So now I found the puppy twice. I call the original owners and I'm like, look, this is weird and I don't care if you believe me, but I found your freaking puppy again. The shelter adopted him out way before the standard stray hold had expired and without being altered. I connect her to the new adoptive owner who is crushed when he hears the backstory. The original owner goes to the shelter for answers about how this could have happened and decides to believe me when, due to the system being down, they can't show her any of the paperwork for the dog being relinquished or adopted out. She believes me now, but instead of all three of us, me, new owner, and old owner, going up there and exposing the lies once and for all, she wants to sue their butts off. She doesn't get her dog back for weeks because it's evidence or some crap, and I'm not supposed to confront the shelter until she says so. I have 2 lawyers in my family who say this suit won't go anywhere, and it doesn't, to my knowledge. I never got any closure. All I want for them is to look me in the eye and admit to throwing me under the bus. A day or 2 after the truth came out and the original dog owner had begun her crusade against the shelter, reporting them to the news, reporting them to the county commission, etc., the county dog warden creeped by my house at about 9 p.m. I'm instantly suspicious. Next night, same thing, but my dog and I are out for a walk on my street. The next morning I get a knock on my door from an official-looking man asking if the dog in the yard is mine. Apparently a dog that looked like him bit someone, but this guy is so nervous and he's stuttering that he can barely get the words out. I look him in the eye and tell him that my dog is never loose or out of my sight and to get off my porch. He said my dog matched the description they had. Well, the interesting thing is that my next-door neighbor has the exact same breed, same color, and everything. Do you think they asked her if her dog had bit anyone? Negative. Same investigation. I'm glad I told him to get lost. After that, I took my dog for a vacation at my dad's farm. I'm convinced the shelter wanted some petty revenge. This was 4 years ago, but screw you, Dana and Mike. In 3rd grade, there was this one kid and we hated each other. One day, I get accused of calling him the N-word during recess. The only problem was I was on the other side of the playground from him. Come lunchtime, the teacher pulls me aside and starts scolding me and demanding that I apologize to him for calling him that. I refused to because I didn't, and I didn't even see him all day. She then gets on me for claiming he was lying, and it's wrong to accuse someone of lying, and that I had to apologize for both now. I refused and said I didn't say anything, and I refused to apologize for something I didn't do. Finally, she says if I didn't do it, to just apologize for it. I replied saying that if I apologized for doing something I didn't do, then it would look like I actually did it and be wrong. I refused, stood my ground, and got a week of lunchtime detention. Totally worth it. That sucks, although I'll be the first to admit that I'd have no idea what to do in a situation like that where you have no proof one way or the other as to who said what. I'm glad I'm not a teacher. Not sure which of my bad luck Brian stories to share here, so let's go with one of my personal favorites that had the biggest risk of jail time. It was about 10 to 15 years ago, and I'd recently graduated college and finally had the money to go and drink. Friends and I would go out and listen to cover bands and drink and have a good old time. However, because we weren't stupid, we would auto-rotate through the designated driver through the night. This night, it was my time to be said driver. I picked up the guys and we all go downtown and get into the parking garage. It's one of those take a ticket, gate opens, pay before you leave situations. We're at the bar, having a good old time, drinks are had, well, not by me, and many advances on women are rejected and we call it a night. Get to the car and go back to the gate and put in the ticket. Ticket spits back out, put in the ticket, ticket spits back out. I look over the ticket and it appears to be in working order, no major fold on said ticket and everything looks fine. I try this 4 or 5 more times before pressing the call button, but this just rings a phone and nothing happens. At this juncture, I'm livid. I just want to get the heck home. And this is a time before Uber and a town where taxi service is craptastic at best. Sure, I could walk 5 miles home, but I don't want to. So I try the ticket again. Finally, Chris has had enough. He gets out of my car and starts screaming obscenities till he's red in the face. He goes to the gate and just lifts it up. You can hear it break. At this point, nothing I can do but just drive on home. Well, those garages have cameras. Those cameras look at the license plates, and those license plates tie back to your name. So imagine my shock when I get a call from the police department the next day saying they want to question me regarding property damage in excess of some crazy number. Well, in the end, Chris admitted he did it. He had to pay for the repairs and do some community service. But man, that sucked. What's the most spectacular way you've seen someone screw up at work? A grad student was invited into a professor's office for a meeting and was left alone for a moment. There was a pile of cumulative exams on the professor's desk that had just been graded. These are subject exams for grad students. Wickedly difficult, and you need to pass 4 to continue in the program. This moron decided he'd take a look at the stack of exams, then upon finding that some of his fellow students did poorly, he took pictures of their grades so he could use them to ridicule them and pass the results around the department. This was a big deal because numerical grades aren't ever given out for these exams, only pass and fail. And also, it's a pretty big FERPA violation to distribute others' personal academic information like that. FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. He was found out almost as soon as he sent the pics around and was dismissed and forbidden from campus immediately. Someone else had to pack up his desk because they were that serious about him never setting foot in the building again. Good frickin' riddance. I'm so thankful none of my classmates in my grad program were this petty and cruel. It's hard enough with everyone being supportive and awesome. The sheer idiocy of that dude is breathtaking. A co-worker received a promotion and a large raise. They were told they should thank the CEO as he initiated the entire promotion. My co-worker went on a rant about not asking for any of it, so he's not thanking anyone, and it escalated from there. By the end of the day, he was fired. My co-worker actually turned a promotion into a termination. One of my co-workers at a grocery store accidentally locked the only master key set into the security office, then attempted to break the door down with a claw hammer before anyone could find out. 10 minutes of furious attacking only succeeded in attracting the attention of everyone in the store, breaking off the handle and bending the entire lock, making it inoperable by the locksmith brought in later. Guy drops a glove in the deep fryer, sticks his entire hand in before realizing it's on and set to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Oops, I dropped the thing that's meant to protect my hand in that hot oil. Better stick my hand into said hot oil to fish it out. Oh no, there's hot oil on my hand. Who could have foreseen this turn of events? The author continues with another story. My current job is a lab technician at a major university, and we had a new guy unplug the small -80 degrees Celsius freezer full of recombinant DNA because he wanted to charge his phone. Oh, yikes. I remember when I worked as a lab tech and another tech overfilled some of the wells in our stock DNA sample tray, contaminating all of the other wells. Then she just wiped off the excess and didn't tell anybody. Not only did we have to travel several hours to another university to get new DNA samples, but we had to throw out several weeks' worth of work since we'd unknowingly been using contaminated samples. I was once a bank teller. One day, a guy comes in to pay off a line of credit that he shares with his son. Apparently, his son is a substance addict and ran a line of credit up to $10,000, maxing it out. The guy comes in, talks to my fellow teller, pays it off, and signs to close it out. He asked my co-worker at least 3 times that it was closed. She assures him that it is. She's also addicted to her phone and loans most of her attention to it, by the way. The guy leaves. Several months later, the same guy comes in enraged with a line of credit bill. He comes to my window and explains the situation. He thought it was closed. It turns out that our bank's policy, not sure if this is universal, is that both he and his son have to sign off to close it out, unless there's some sort of special circumstance that never happened. The guy owed another $10,000 because of course his son isn't going to sign off on closing it out if he can run up the balance again. Dad says he's going to sue. I point him in the direction of someone more qualified than me. My manager tells me he has a good case and will probably beat out our corporate bank in court. I'm just a teller. Some days it's good to be on the bottom. Glad it wasn't me that messed it up. I work at a call center. I reviewed a call where the guy thought the phone was muted and called the customer a stupid moron. The customer called him out and he tried to backpedal and make up some story. He was fired shortly after. When I worked at a call center, this was a regular occurrence. I used to work at Popeyes, this fried chicken chain. It sucked and I eventually quit. A week after I quit, the night crew decided they didn't feel like putting the boxes away from a truck shipment. Someone could deal with it next day. Few days later, and several reports of food poisoning later, they got in a load of trouble. Boxes were full of raw chicken. I'm so glad that I quit. A couple of years ago, we had a new supervisor directly from corporate. He got a promotion and moved from another city. He was a complete jerk, micromanagement nightmare, arrogant, a few other things. But someone up in the corporate ladder really liked the guy, so he had full support from the bosses. Then in his first month of work, his company car was stolen. It was insured, so no big deal. A week later, his replacement car was stolen again, and a third car 2 weeks later. Turns out the guy had trouble with alcohol and he got really drunk and left the car open on the street and just forgot about it. He wasn't fired, he was just moved to a desk job with no company car. I used to work in a grocery store and I had an HR person repeatedly lose my doctor's note stating that I have Raynaud's syndrome and couldn't be in the freezer. I got a stack of them from the doc and would have to bring in a new one every few weeks. Finally, I had a department head fax a copy into corporate for me before dropping off yet another copy to the HR witch. The next week, the HR witch called me into her office and told me I was going to have to put the frozen load for bakery away. I told her I couldn't do it and I had a note on file. She told me she didn't have any paperwork on file for me and that she could make me do anything she wanted. I called my department manager into my office and told him what she had said. I got corporate on the phone and asked if they had received a copy of my doctor's note detailing the fact that I had Raynaud's syndrome and had already previously gotten frostbite at work from being forced to be in the freezer when I wasn't supposed to be. He said they had it and he then told them what HR Witch had said. He then handed HR Witch the phone. She had to hold the phone about 1.5 feet away from her face because they were yelling at her so loud. It was one of the most satisfying days ever working there. She went on leave shortly after that and never came back, and the official story was that she was having health problems. A substitute came into work completely hammered once. The job started at 8 and he drove there drunk. I get that junior high is stressful, but drink afterwards. That's not a great endorsement of the school he worked at the day before. One time, this complete moron I worked with in the shipyards, a pipe welder, was torching a pipe next to lagging, which is what helps insulate Navy ships. Instead of taking 5 minutes at most to use a blade to remove said lagging, the moron welded the pipe and torched the lagging. It doesn't burst into flames, but there was a lot of smoke and ended up getting the ship evacuated. He got fired 2 weeks later while his write-up was pending, because he put a ladder in the middle of a passageway, which are extremely tight when you consider the heavy equipment moving through. When he was asked to move, the welder told the person asking to F off. And when you tell that to the shipyard director, well, you tend to get fired. Worked in a single-story cinder block office with parking spaces out front. There was a big window that overlooked the parking lot. We had an older engineer, early 70s, that worked there. He pulled up one morning in his parking spot and must have gotten the brakes and the gas confused. He drove the car right through the window, taking out some of the wall with it. I can still remember seeing him gripping the steering wheel with this terrified look in his eyes while he kept slamming on the gas. The car must have gotten stuck on something because it would just lurch forward and the engine would rev. Luckily, he didn't kill anyone. He retired soon after that. It's actually a pretty common human error problem. People get the pedals switched in their head, and then panic causes them to lock their foot on the brake. We're fallible creatures. The narrator has fallen prey to this very problem before while riding a moped for the first time. It's amazing how long your brain can panic lock itself into holding onto the mechanical switch that does the opposite of what you need it to do. My coworker sold someone an auto insurance policy but forgot to check the effective date. Turns out she had pushed the start date of the policy out a month. Guy got into an accident a few days later. Cumulatively, we probably spent more than 10 hours on the phone trying to get claims to cover this guy's accident. She ended up messing up the effective date on about 10 other policies before she left. I work at a group home for people with mental and physical disabilities. Most of the residents can't walk or even stand on their own, so staff will help them stand or hold on to them while they walk so they don't fall over. Well, I had one coworker that was stupid. For multiple reasons, but this one takes the cake. She helped one of the residents stand up to use the restroom, had her put her hands on the handlebar attached to the bathroom, similar to the bathroom stall, and left to get things that the resident needed to take a shower. She left her standing there alone for a solid 3 or 4 minutes. Of course, the resident fell and hit her head pretty good. Had to go to the hospital and get stitches. She ended up being fine afterwards. How on earth my coworker wasn't fired is completely beyond me. I'm a welfare caseworker. A few months ago, I got a call from a client wondering what was going on with her case. Read the case comments and found out that one of my more intellectual coworkers shut down this case and assessed a 5-year overpayment on this client for her cash aid, basically saying that all the aid she'd ever received was fraudulent and she needed to pay it all back. Her reasoning? There was a glitch in the system that made this woman's child show as a resident in a different country. Rather than following established protocol and calling this woman, or ordering a fraud investigation from our literal unit of full-time investigators, or anything else that would make sense, she went out of her way to make this woman's life hard. For the record, I called the other county and the worker I spoke with confirmed that the child was no longer a resident. His father had reported to them that the family was moving to our county 5 years ago, and they'd been trying, unsuccessfully, to update his county residence ever since. Because I caught the phone call, I had to unscrew the case and close out the overpayment. I work with preemies in a neonatal ICU. We get morphine in a multi-dose syringe that's good for 24 hours. We generally give doses for it every 4 hours. Every time we dose, we have to chart the amount in the electronic medical record, calculate a safe dose, draw it up, show it to another nurse along with the calculations, scan it, there's a million safety checks. A nurse did exactly none of these things and gave the whole syringe to the baby. Then she ordered another and did it again in 4 hours. And then she did it again 4 hours later. The baby got more than 3 days' worth of morphine in 12 hours. He had to be put on a breathing machine. Somehow, she did not get fired. There was a nursing shortage in Pennsylvania at the time. Sort of a similar situation. I worked in a blood bank and we sent some blood to the floor for a nurse to transfuse into a specific patient. Different nurse picked it up, doesn't look at the label, doesn't look at the patient name, doesn't do any of the 3 electronic checks and sticks it into a patient. Transfused the whole bag and then decides to let us know she made a simple mistake. No big deal. Okay, thanks, bye. Thank God the blood type matched, or she would have killed that patient. We're freaking out and filing reports to managers and the FDA. She gets a slap on the wrist and is transfusing the same patient later that day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. This one time I worked at a company who made shelter cloth, like for orchards. It was woven from plastic thread. There were these huge banks of needles that just ran and ran, making these giant rolls of cloth. The night shift guy was pretty new, and the night shift was just him and the machine. It would take most of the shift to do a full roll with a setup and take down. The lunchroom was soundproofed because the production floor was pretty noisy. So the night shift guy basically just had to babysit the weaver all night and then change the rollout and set up for day shift. I came in early one morning because I wanted to pick up some gear I'd left in my locker, and I walk into the unholiest nightmare you've ever seen. A Gordian knot at least 30 foot high. The guy had sat there until like 2 a.m., the darkest part of the night. Then he decided to smoke some Mary J in the lunchroom and had fallen asleep. He woke up hours later to the sound of the weaver smashing itself to pieces. One of the needle banks had moved during the night and he hadn't seen the warning indicator. So then it had worked its way loose, then snapped, then flipped over and snapped the one next to it. Then it had made hundreds and hundreds of meters of messed up Frankenstein cloth with the giant kilometer-long thread bunches. I walked in to him screaming. He had woken up 15 minutes prior and had not got past freaking out. I could think clearer than him, so I went and got the big forklift and pulled this huge bird's nest off of the needle banks and slammed them in, and likewise hid the busted up ones in the dumpster. Then we started feeding in the new roll and just got the machine going again when the day shift came in. They were surprised that the night guy had got through the overnight materials so fast, but since it happened sometimes when the machine behaved, they didn't make a big deal. I went back to uni about 2 months later and never found out if the story continued. But the crazed look of the night shift guy screaming and holding his chest has stayed with me for 30 years. I can't imagine how much stress he was under, being brand new at a job and thinking that you had not only lost your job, but also completely wrecked the machine, a ton of material, and maybe been open to legal action might completely freak a person out. In 2009, we had some layoffs, like a lot of businesses, and one of those let go was a mechanic. Since most of the mechanics bring in a lot of their own toolboxes when one leaves the company, they'll need to load up their box. The screw-up was that the supervisor of the shop that day didn't pay attention or stick around while the mechanic was loading his box. The mechanic not only loaded up his box, he helped himself to several company-owned pieces of equipment, totaling $18,000 in value. But because the supervisor wasn't doing his job, there was no proof that the mechanic took those items. This is the same supervisor who didn't notice when a huge spool of copper wire somehow rolled itself out of the building. Said supervisor no longer works here either. New coworker on her first day went to get coffee from the break room, was walking back to it when she just barely stumbled a little bit, just enough that some hot coffee dripped over the edges of the cup and burnt her fingers. So she reactively flung her hand and released the mug, causing lots of hot coffee to go all over the walls just outside the boss's office. She literally just stared frozen at the coffee-drenched wall and said, "Oh, geez." We gave her heck for it for about a year in a joking way. She actually proved to be a fantastic coworker. Used to deliver pizzas. Our dumb idiot manager that lived in a hotel and effed everything that moved contracted hepatitis A, but told no one and still came into work. After a few days, he began looking like an overweight banana and was complaining of all the classic symptoms. He was told to go home by corporate while we had to deep clean the store and throw away all of the ingredients due to possible contamination. In the middle of us cleaning, he decides to waltz in with what we think might be a working girl because he forgot his jacket. I was so dumbfounded that he would do this in front of one of the two bigwigs that were monitoring us. He was fired on the spot. 2 days after that, and our restaurant made the local news when a few people began to claim that they'd contracted Hep A from our pizza. There was a Hep A outbreak in our community at the time, so whether that was true or not, I'll never know. Sales suffered, and it took the store almost a year to recover. Let me tell you about Joe. Joe was hired as an entry-level developer. He started on a Monday. Every Tuesday, our team had a meeting in the first-floor conference room. Meeting time rolls around. No Joe. We wait. After a couple of minutes, I walk over to his cube. Not there. Check his break room. Nope. Stick my head in the men's room. Empty. Screw it. Go back to the meeting and tell my boss I have no idea. Maybe he forgot and was still at lunch. We start the meeting. A few minutes later, Joe walks in, about 15 minutes late. He apologizes and says he's been downstairs looking for the first-floor meeting rooms. Yes, he was wandering around the fricking basement looking for the first-floor meeting room. This was an omen of things to come. He was constantly falling asleep at his desk. He called out sick about 12 times in his first month. My boss finally told him one morning that they needed to have a talk. He had meetings most of the morning, so he told Joe to stop by his office around 11:30. Joe doesn't show up. Boss waits, and finally, at 12, we go to get lunch. While we're gone, Joe comes in, gets all of his personal belongings from his desk, and disappears. Never heard from him again. Now, whenever a newbie makes a mistake and is apologizing for it, we say, "Well, at least you know where the first floor is." I'm a cashier in a pharmacy. Anyone that works in the medical field knows that patient privacy is super important. When a patient picks up their prescription, we have to scan the receipt of their medication to the computer. This is unique to each individual prescription, so if it doesn't match, we accidentally grabbed someone else's medication. It catches mistakes before we make them. The alternative to scanning is typing the RX number into the computer. This doesn't guarantee a match. Only comparing the number on the receipt with the number on the computer will work if the barcode won't work. One day, while I was on break, someone came in looking for a prescription. The girl covering my post clearly confirmed the date of birth, but grabbed someone else's prescription by mistake. 2 people with the same last name were next to each other in the fridge. But she didn't scan the receipt, so her mistake was not caught. She typed the number she saw on the computer, had the person sign for their medication, and gave them someone else's medication. Not 20 minutes later, the patient calls and tells us what he received was not intended for him. We, of course, apologized, and he came back to get his medication. The sad thing is, once something leaves the store, it can't be returned. We can dispose of it, but we can't use it for someone else, even if it's still sealed. This particular medication cost $4,000, and we had to throw it out. This, plus the breach of privacy, didn't stand well, and she was written up for her mistake. She doesn't use cash much anymore and is confined to packaging. Ouchies. Accidentally wasting medication to the tune of a very generous monthly salary is one heck of a thing for a manager to hang over your head for the remainder of your employment there. One of the cops on a base I was stationed at ran his vehicle right into the wing of a jet. He then decided to throw the light bar that had been sheared off into a random dumpster like it had never happened. That idiot was caught immediately. This literally happened last Thursday. New teacher at the daycare, working in the baby room. Here's her list of what made everyone dislike her. 1. She told many aides she didn't like babies while working in the baby room. 2. She refused to change diapers, burp the babies, or even feed them in high chairs. 3. She just sat in the same chair and refused to do anything at all. 4. She wouldn't train new aides or help them in the room. And 5. She didn't care about bonding with the children or even her co-workers. But her biggest mess-up was that she let a baby roll off the changing table. According to my co-workers, she simply walked away from this child and left him there, and he rolled off and hit the floor. Apparently, she has a history of this, where other teachers and aides had to be like, "What the frick? Watch the baby and keep a hand on them at all times on the changing table." The only reason she took the job was because, and I quote, "Daddy won't give me spending money with my graduation present, so I'm just going to do this until July and then quit." Her grad present was a 2-week trip to Hawaii. She got fired for negligence, so good riddance. The baby is fine and the parents aren't suing or anything, and I can only think this is because the other teacher, who was feeding the new infant, was there, and they trust her heavily, and know she'd never put their son directly in harm's way. Good riddance. Worked at Arby's in 2016. It's approaching 10 p.m. and everybody working really wants to go home. A guy making sandwiches accidentally gets some bread stuck in the toaster oven. For some reason, he uses a knife with a plastic handle to try and get it out. The knife gets stuck, so he uses a second knife to get the first knife and bread out. That knife gets stuck, and he uses a third knife to get the other 2 knives and the bread out. Now all the knives are stuck in the toaster oven, and the plastic handle starts to melt. In short, step-by-step guide to getting the toaster oven at Arby's replaced. Someone I worked with at a Toyota dealership didn't rack an SUV right on the lift, and it fell off. It really did way less damage than I thought, but he was fired on the spot. When I worked at Home Depot, a co-worker who worked in lumber crashed the forklift into a car and messed it up pretty bad. Weapon shop owners. What crazy reasons have you had to refuse a person a sale? This lady was telling my brother, the owner of the shop, that she needed something more effective because the arrows she had been shooting weren't sinking the canoes and kayaks of people floating down the river in her backyard. They wanted to look at a piece up close. I took it out to let him see it, and he pointed it right at my face. Wasn't at the shop per se, but at the range inside the shop. I'd bought a .45 that I wanted to run a few rounds through and did just that. As I was leaving the booth and heading to the exit, an older gentleman tapped me on the arm and asked for help. I didn't work at this establishment, and compared to many, I don't have a ton of experience, but I have a pretty freaking solid understanding of safety with these devices. That being said, I stopped and asked him what he needed. He stated that he was having trouble with his weapon, which was on the bench in the booth, and that he couldn't get it to fire, even though the safety was off. As I was responding with the usual, "Do you have a round chambered?" he just picked it up, pointed it at himself, and pulled the trigger. By some sick divine intervention, it didn't fire. I slowly and firmly removed it from his hands and brought it back to said bench, where I removed the magazine and discharged a very live round. It took all of half a second to see that the safety was sitting in a cool, half-on, half-off position, and that he was scooting by on sheer dumb luck. I placed the device back on the bench, asked him to wait a minute, and walked out the doorway to the front desk. Before I could open my mouth, the range officer was walking around to give the guy a piece of his mind. In Texas, I was standing at my kitchen sink doing the dishes in a third-floor apartment one day, looking out the window. Directly across, the guy on 3 had come out with a piece and was cleaning it on a table. I looked away, and when I looked back, the family on 2 had let their toddler out on the patio with a toy. I watched in slow motion as this guy let go of the slide and aimed the piece at the ground, through the floor where the toddler was playing below, and fired a live round into the patio cement. As I was just out the door, I saw the kid's dad grab him and sweep him inside, but I've never been down and up 3 flights of stairs so quickly. In retrospect, it was stupid not to grab my own piece, and at least my phone, but Captain Intelligence on 3 wasn't hostile, just stupid. He was still holding the piece and shaking it when he answered the door. The kid was unhurt, but my faith in people's ability to safely exercise their rights may never recover. Meanwhile in Texas should be a subreddit by itself. The narrator is not mentally ready for the Meanwhile in Texas subreddit, and our viewers are certainly not ready for a 20-minute video of him attempting that accent. Other than the few who were drunk or high, one that sticks out was the guy who asked for the cheapest gat, not so unusual, and only 1 bullet. After he noticed my reaction, he backpedaled and turned it into a joke. I obviously was still uncomfortable and looped my manager in. We ran the background check and told him it had been delayed and that he could come back tomorrow while we figured out what else we could do. He left without incident but then sat in his car in the parking lot for a long time. The manager decided contacting the police was the best route at the time. Not sure what happened afterwards, but he did not come back. Dude, we sell them in boxes of 20 minimum. How much more obvious can you be? Oh boy, I've turned down sales for simple things like mishandling the weapon and pointing it at people, for saying they were buying it for their husband 15 minutes after he was rejected on the InstaCheck system, but the one that took the cake was late one night, after selling hours anyways. I was closing down my department and this young couple came up to the counter. The guy was roughed up and bleeding from multiple cuts on his head. Nothing too bad, but still alarming. The girl he was with walked him up and said, "We need a piece." Rather than just say, "Sorry, it's after hours," I instead said, "Alright, which one?" She looked at the display cases and said, "I need one that will hurt someone." I just looked at her for a second, incredulous that she was that stupid. I said, "Well, they can all hurt someone," and she pointed at a Mossberg 22 and said, "What about that one?" And I said, "Yeah, that could hurt someone if it was used the wrong way," and she points at the Winchester. "What about that one?" I said, "That one is definitely dangerous." She said she'd take it, and that's when I said no. Sorry, it's past hours, and I just didn't trust her or him with a piece right now, because he obviously just got his butt kicked. She started yelling at me, and I said, "Alright, I think it's time to call the cops," and picked up the phone. That's when they said F off and left. It was pretty funny, actually. The place I teach has had a few interesting ones. I saw a customer's probation officer's card in their wallet. The owner of the shop knew the probation officer and called and asked if their client was allowed to have a weapon. The answer, surprisingly, was no. There was a lady with symptoms of being homeless who came in looking for a small piece, and while furiously dry-firing a pocket 22 says, "It's not to kill someone, but like to teach them a lesson." Lots and lots of confused people thinking that one of these things can be in their spouse's or girlfriend's name or whatever, like a car loan. It's okay if she does the paperwork, right? No, it's not. The person buying the piece has to do the paperwork. My state also has legal, medicinal, and recreational green herb use. The owner doesn't care unless you make him care, but other places, if they see your medicinal card, they don't mess around. But they still have people who come in obviously reeking of Mary Jane, since we're between 2 dispensaries, and the owner will be like, "Come on, you wouldn't try to mess with a piece drunk, would you?" I don't work for a specialist shop, but I was involved with a pawn shop when it went down. A neighbor had dementia and lived alone. His son was a piece of crap and randomly got him caretakers who were seriously messed up individuals. Think cops outside at 3 a.m. saying the caretaker was asking for a ride at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, high as a kite. Apparently my neighbor owned a pair of weapons. His caretaker would pawn them monthly to buy substances and buy them back later when the neighbor's social security came in. I didn't know this, but what I did know is the caretaker was a felon, and he's not allowed to live in a house with that kind of ordinance lying around. It turned out they smelled something funny going on finally at the pawn shop when this guy, high as frick, eased this old man into the shop to sell his pieces every month. They wanted someone to co-sign for him, so he asks, reasoning that since I'm a good fellow and I work for the police department, I wouldn't have a problem with this. That I wouldn't have a problem with a felon and an elderly man with dementia buying weapons every month to store in the house. What a frickin' crap show. I spoke to the manager, who went and got the store owner, who asked me to repeat the story. Thank the Lord they reported it and turned the weapons over to the cops. I'm not a clerk at one of those shops, but I've had to refuse several private sales for sketchy behavior. When people gripe about wanting to see an in-state ID or a carry permit, that's a pretty good indicator they aren't legally allowed to possess a dangerous weapon. I had one guy text me pictures of his automatic collection as proof that he had a Class 3, and therefore I wouldn't be violating the law by selling to an out-of-state buyer. He vehemently refused to meet at a federal licensing place to do the transfer, even when I offered to pay for it. Yeah, okay dude, you're clearly a felon and also your full auto-suppressed MP5 is actually a 22 with a fake can. I worked at Turner's Outdoorsman in Reseda during the early 2000s. One time a family came in, mother, father, and 13-year-old son. They wanted to buy a shotty for home protection. Okay, no problem. The issue was that they kept taking the countersample firearms and way overdoing it on racking them. The 13-year-old had obviously seen Terminator a few times and was racking the side like the woman in the movie did in the film, one-handed and really hard. That's not good for the equipment. I have to tell him to stop. The father got indignant, so I asked him to leave. I was in my early 20s, a blonde white girl, and they didn't like that. I had to get my manager to finally make them leave. I ran a weapons store and a pawn shop for 5 years. I advertised a lot of the inventory online on Facebook when that was still allowed. I had one guy ask every question imaginable about a high point, $100, a piece of garbage in my opinion. Then when he showed up, his girlfriend wanted to purchase it. That's gonna be a no from me, dog. I don't do straw purchases. Happened a lot. Guys would come in, ask about a weapon and negotiate a price, then try to send their wife or girlfriend up for the 4473. I feel good about every sale I ever denied. I only regret one sale. The piece in question was used by the gentleman to self-delete. A well-known local teacher you would never have known. Man spends 30 minutes pawning a high point, leaves without buying. 10 minutes later, strung-out-looking girl comes in, looks at her hand and goes, "Hello, I would like to buy a high point C9 in 9mm caliber with a high-capacity magazine, please." Classic. At least once a month in my store. That's incredibly concerning. Also, if it wasn't obvious, we have to use slightly more obscure words to refer to the projectile-firing descendants of old black powder weapons to get past certain limitations on this platform. But hopefully you've grasped the subject matter if you've made it this far. Just a noob question here from someone who doesn't know a lot. When you join the US Army, do they just forgo the background check, or is that part of your general background check for the forces? No. Been in the Army 13 years and have 6 weapons. The background check applies to everyone. You'll be denied a sale if you have a dishonorable discharge. At a second-hand shop, I was talking with the guy at the counter, and a dude walked in wearing full-on paramilitary, kinda school shootout garb, and a mask with a long arm slung on his back, and a smaller piece in his hand, loaded with the hammer back held out to the side, with his finger on the trigger, and he yelled if someone could help him. Obviously, me and the clerk both pull out our weapons and point them at this idiot and tell him to put it down. I'm looking around to see if there's anyone else around. People are freaking out in the parking lot because they see I have a piece, and I tell them to call the police. Turns out this inbred idiot had just come back from playing airsoft and wanted to sell a weapon he bought off the street. I'm not a shop owner. I was in a store when the following happened that made me go, how freaking stupid can you be? A guy came in to buy a weapon, begins to fill out NICS, checked yes on 11B, are you under felony indictment, and got denied. He said, well, I'm out on bail, so I should be able to have a weapon. The clerk asked what for. Domestic. Checked no on H. Do you have an order of protection against you? The clerk says he's going to call NICS to file an appeal. The clerk calls the police. The police arrive. The idiot is arrested and goes back to jail with new charges, including lying on Form 4473. I know criminals are dumb, but come on, man. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I sold the items in question in a sporting goods store. A guy comes in and was looking at our selection. He claimed he was a former CIA assassin. Sure, whatever. He picked up a weapon, cocked it, and pointed it at me and pulled the trigger. I put it back and told him he was not buying anything from me or anyone else in this department. He looked at me and said, "I'll be back for you." I called over one of my colleagues who was an off-duty cop that worked there part-time and told him what had happened. He flashed his badge and told the guy to leave the store and to not come back. The man left, cussing up a storm, and I never saw him again. When I'm reading this, I'm just imagining the customer as a really edgy teen. A lady came into my store and wanted to buy a Ruger 10-22, but when she told me which one she wanted, she just said, "The black one." Fine, I don't care if she doesn't know the name, and I thought, what a perfect opportunity to upsell her on some training that we offered. Well, I got out the old form and walked her through my generic spiel, noting specifically, if you have no middle name, please put NMN in the box for middle name, not just NA. Just write NMN for no middle name. Attempt 1, the lady puts a big X through the box for middle name. I calmly explain it to her again and get her a new form. She puts NA in the box. I look at her questioningly and asked if she has a middle name, to which she responds no. I start to explain the process to her for a third time when she gets livid, picks up the 4473 form and rips it in half, and calls me a racist white boy cracker, who is being difficult over a stipularity. I think it was a cross between stipulation and technicality. I looked at her plainly and said, "Well, if you can't fill out the form, you can't buy the weapon. The sale is denied." After some more heated words sent my way, she was escorted out by the owner, who was watching the whole thing and listening from the back office 10 feet away. I denied a sale when someone admitted that they'd shot a bear at a state park out of season, poaching, and another time when someone pretty much told me they were going to use the item to kill a guy in Alabama. I also stopped numerous straw purchases. Most of the time, people didn't understand that it wasn't legal. The number of people who would absolutely lose their minds when I would have to walk them out the front door before I could give them their weapon was crazy. It was just store policy, but sometimes it would make the most normal weapon buyer turn nuts. There was this one guy who would come in about once a week with a new person each time. They'd be buying a weapon for themselves, but they didn't know anything about weapons. At first, I thought the guy was just helping friends pick one out, but after a while, he winked at me and said, "See you at the revolution." Cult leader? Anti-government? Who knows? I soon after left that job and never saw him again, but it sure left me with stories. As much as I'm sure all of our viewers from the States will enjoy hearing this from a person with a British-ish voice, there really needs to be a better form of control than just filling out a simple form, even though that basic task does seem to elude some of these morons. I was at my local store for these items, just chatting after picking a few things up. Another guy comes in looking for suppressors, says he's interested in one, to which the clerk starts explaining the tax stamp paperwork. In my state, you can own NFA items no problem. You don't get jammed up, but still go through the ATF process. The guy digests it all, says that's fine, understands the $200 tax, etc. The guy says something along the lines of, "Okay, I'll fill everything out and then come pick it up later this afternoon." To which the employee laughs, thinking he's joking, because if you've ever been through the process, the wait time is on average 9 months to a year. Personally, the fastest I've had an item processed is 7 months, but every other one has been at least 9. So the store employee was obviously thinking he's joking. The guy was dead serious and that he thought he could pick it up that afternoon. He got really irate and started cussing the employee out, and said, "If you're not willing to give it to me today, why do you even display them?" Then came a few racial slurs. The employee helping him was Hispanic, and as the rest of the employees came over to escort him out, he said something like, "Y'all wait until I raise hell with the Better Business Bureau," and then a few more racial slurs before he was physically escorted out. The other one was told me by a friend who works at a different store. The guy comes in wanting to buy a piece, and when handed the paperwork, he says, "Oh, I didn't think there were background checks in this state," and leaves. Not long after all this, a patron who had just left the range comes back in letting them know that as soon as he got to his car, some guy came up asking if he'd sell one of his pieces for cash, no questions asked. The guy was just walking around the parking lot asking people if they would sell him one. When the police came and arrested him, he actually yelled, "But I was told anyone can buy guns in this state without ID." That was his actual response to the police. Apparently he had warrants in California and a bunch of missed court appearances. Another one was relayed to me from a friend who was at an auction house bidding on some weapons. Up for auction, there was a double-rune Mauser, which symbolized the rifle was likely used or issued by German special forces in World War II. They tend to sell for a very high premium. Some guy who got outbid tried to cause a scene about how these weapons should stay with the race and not go to those people. still arguing about it as the police arrested him after refusing to leave. Used to work at a specialist store and law enforcement supply. I saw a lot of stupid things, cops almost discharging their duty weapon, etc., even had a couple of holes in the ceiling from before I started. But the craziest reason I've denied someone was arguably the dumbest. Not dumb in the way some of the others have posted. I had plenty of denials for attempted straw purchase. So this frequent customer decides to bring his dad in one day to get a new piece to carry. Spend about 30 minutes helping him pick out a good one and a nice holster to go with it. He filled out the background check form and I'm getting ready to call it in when I noticed something odd. In the section where you select your ethnicity, he had drawn his own checkbox and wrote, Native Mexican American. I informed him that he wasn't allowed to do that and he just needed to do as the instructions stated. Select the box that matched his ethnicity the closest, i.e. Latino. He just could not be convinced to select a meaningless box on a form that the info didn't even get reported on. I had to deny the sale. I half wonder if he was just crazy or if he was an agent testing me with something stupid. A guy with SS Thunderbolts on his neck. I didn't even show him his piece he sent for the transfer, just told him to get out and I sent the weapon back. There was also a crazy lady who during the paperwork said it was for protection from the Mexicans in her basement that snuck up in the night to get her. I told her she was delayed and called the police. In case you're wondering, this is Tucson, Arizona, where there are almost no basements. And finally, a lady who came in asking for a particular model. We showed it to her. I asked her questions about ammo as she was smaller and it was a large weapon. She kept checking her phone and said this is the one she wanted even though she didn't know the caliber or the first thing about these kinds of weapons. I put two and two together, I explained what a straw purchase is and told her to leave. A customer came in and picked out a weapon, did the 4473 and failed the NICS check, tried to get us to sell it to his girlfriend instead. That's a big no. I sell at weapon shows with my buddy who has an FFL, and these young kids, they had to be about 13 years old, came up with a stack of cash, around $2,000, and they wanted to buy 4 AKs, so I asked them for ID as I pulled out the 4473s, because I've seen older guys that look young as heck as well. I told them that each AK is $700 and they said, wait, what are those papers? So I asked them how old they were and they said 18, but didn't want to fill out the paperwork because they want to take them to Mexico. I told my buddy to go call the cops and they left as quickly as they could. I had a woman buy 10,000 rounds of .22 long round and tried to buy 2 Ruger 10-22 rifles and a Smith & Wesson MP15, and she filled out her 4473 and I called it in and she got delayed. The FBI can delay the sale or pickup for 5 days in North Carolina if the person needs an investigation on their background. I'm still waiting for a reply, and she comes back the next day to ask if felons can buy weapons, and that she hopes they could because she was tired of seeing the zombies eat people in her yard and highway and crap. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that she didn't instantly get denied when I called the day before. If she just admitted to this crazy crap, I manage a second-hand shop in North Carolina for those wondering. Customer here. I once saw a guy claiming to be a veteran throw a tantrum about how he misunderstood the waiting period and apparently failed to file proper DROS paperwork, so his waiting period had to restart. The whole room got quiet and I was pretty sure he was seconds away from being denied and getting escorted out until he came to his senses and filed the correct documents. Good lord! Can you withhold sales from someone who nearly flies off the handlebars like this? Part of me is wishing you could, although I suppose it would be hard to justify. I was at a store once when the owner, Gunther, prevented 2 people from buying big automatic pieces. One of them was institutionalized for setting her roommate on fire, and the other one was wanted for questioning in many felonious assaults. In the store I worked at, I was hit with a wall of alcoholic stench from 5 feet away. He couldn't even spell his own name right on the background check and expected me to fill it out. He didn't have a form of ID. He wanted the cheapest piece we had. It was all around just a bad experience. My friend used to work as a security guard at the local psych hospital, but because of the laws, he can't state specifically why he's denying each person. When he sees people who he knew were admitted for mania with homicidal ideation, he would just tell his boss, the owner, that he was refusing the sale and knew the customer from prior work experience. His boss knows how to read between the lines on that, and fortunately, federal law supports their right as a shop to refuse to sell a weapon to anyone provided that the reason isn't because of their race, ethnicity, or other federally protected discrimination statuses. I've seen people get refused for stupid reasons, like outright saying that they're buying it for someone else. Not Nona, just a law here in Australia I learned about recently. If you've had a restraining order placed against you, which can be applied for anyone even without proof of any danger, in the last 10 years, then you're ineligible to own, use, or buy a gun. Serving staff, what's the most awkward first date you've seen go down while working? At the end of the dinner, two couples on a double date dine and dash. I chased them down and the girls had no clue. Their dates had told them they'd already paid. The girls ended up paying, the guys had no cash. As a former server, I have to say it's not the first dates that stick out, it's the "we're breaking up and let's have dinner and talk about it" tables that really stay with you. My wife broke up with me while we were dating at an Indian restaurant. We made up and have been married about 8 years now, but it took a darn long time before I could eat Indian food again. More sad than awkward, a guy in a wheelchair came in at about 1:45. Says he has a date at 3, but the only ride he had there was early. So I sat him at a table for 2, he munches on bread for a while and decides to go outside for a bit. He ends up coming in about 20 minutes later and starts telling me and the host I'm working with cheesy jokes. He also mentions that he used to be a policeman before he became wheelchair-bound. He also told us his date is from Panama. The other host and I had a bad feeling about this situation at that point. 3 o'clock rolls around and I see the guy anxiously glancing between his phone and the door. About 45 minutes of this pass before he finally leaves. This was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. I was a line cook at a restaurant. It was a typical Friday night and pretty busy in the kitchen. A server came in and asked if I spoke Chinese. I said yes, and he told me to go talk to some guest at a table. I told him they'll have to wait because we're in the middle of a dinner rush. About an hour later, things slow down a little, so I follow up with the server. He proceeded to point out the table of guests that needed help. So I walked out of the kitchen with the expectation of maybe translating the menu for them or something. When I got up to the table, I noticed it was a white guy and an Asian girl. So I asked the gentleman how I could help him. He then asked me to translate for him. It was at that point that I realized they were on a first date. The guy asked me to translate a few things for him like, "How did you enjoy the dinner?" and "Did you enjoy the date so far?" and other small talk. And I'd have to translate that to the girl and translate her response back to English for him. This went on for about 5 to 10 minutes. Eventually, he asked me to ask the girl if she wanted to sleep with him. The girl asked him if he had a girlfriend. I had to stand there and translate this conversation. Eventually, the girl shot the guy down, and it got pretty awkward at that point, so I found an excuse to go back to the kitchen. In short, had to translate for a guy and asked the girl if she wanted to do the deed with him. I'm honestly just flabbergasted that they arranged this date with such a big hurdle in making basic conversation in place. I think if I had to do this while working, they'd have to get one question in at a time between me, doing my job that they're keeping me from. A young couple was at my table. They were probably 16. She was way overdressed for Red Lobster and a movie, but that was cute. He went to pay and his card was declined. I felt so horrible walking back to the table. He said there should be plenty in his bank account and I asked if he'd put gas in his car before the date. He said he filled up his truck. Some gas stations here hold the amount twice on a debit card after a certain hour and it drops off the next day. The poor kid was so embarrassed he had no idea what to do. My boss paid for his meal, my tip, and gave him money for the movie they were planning to go to. The kid came back in 2 days later with all of the money to pay my boss back. Man, this story. I've never associated Red Lobster with classy, but your boss changed that. I can't believe he even gave some cash for the movie, too. Bartender here. Had a guy this past summer come in for Match.com meetups 4 different times with 4 different ladies. For one of his dates, he told everyone else at the bar that he was from Match.com. His date was late, so everyone at the bar was concerned for him. He told everyone to clap when she arrived. When she finally came, everyone at the bar clapped and cheered. She was horribly embarrassed. No wonder why this guy doesn't hold on to girls for long. She'll be on guard from the second she walks in the door. Why not just get everyone in the place to yell out, "Norm!" Had a professor in college that had us clap when a student would walk in late. He had a really good laugh when we did it when he was late. I'm a hostess, and when we seat people, we have to talk about the specials happening that day. Well, anywho, 2 people came in and they don't appear to be a couple. Both were very stern looking. I started giving my spiel about the drink specials, and she cuts me off and says she won't be drinking tonight. The guy looks at her and asks why. She tells him that she's pregnant. And let's keep in mind that I'm right here between them with no option to walk away because I'm still holding the menus. Well, he freaks out, quickly questioning her, and getting very angry, she starts yelling at him. A lot of tension is floating around, and in the midst of all this anger about being prangent, I chime in and mention that we're also having a special on our baby back ribs. The moment after I realize what I just said, they're staring at me with their jaws dropped. I look them dead in the eye and walk away. I'm not good in these types of situations. Yes, we have some baby back ribs on special, as well as a nice Asian stir-fry with baby bok choy and baby corn. We also have a lobster special that of course comes with a bib. There's also a cheese platter featuring Baby Bell. What can I get started for you? This happens to a friend of mine. We'll call him Alex. Because for this situation, we need a unisex first name. He's on a blind date with a friend of a friend. Alex gets a table at a fairly fancy restaurant that his friend Steve works at as a manager. He arrives first and she gets there about 15 minutes late. No big deal, they chat over drinks. At this point, he doesn't think it's going super great, but doesn't think it's too awkward. At some point after they ordered their food, she excuses herself to the bathroom. A minute or so after she leaves the table, he gets a text on his phone. It's from his date. It says something along the lines of, "I hate blind dates. This guy is a total loser. At least I'll get a few free meals out of him." Alex realizes that the text wasn't meant for him, but for his date's female friend, also called Alex. He gets up from the table and finds Steve in the back and tells him what happened, asks for his half of the order taken off the ticket, and then leaves before she gets back to the table. Alex's date comes back from the bathroom, apparently unaware that she texted the wrong person. Due to some mix-up, the entire order still arrives at the table. Reportedly, she didn't even wait for or even question Alex's absence before she began eating. In fact, she finishes nearly all of her meal before asking her waiter to check where Alex had gone. The waiter checks with his manager, Steve, finds out about the situation and informs her that Alex left while she was in the bathroom. He then hands her the check. The best part is that she didn't have enough money to cover the check. She had to call a friend to come down to the restaurant and pay for her meal. Steve wasn't too keen on letting her slide on the bill. In short, woman accidentally texts her date about only going out with him for free food. He sticks her with the check. I have been waiting so long to tell this story. So I'm a server at Red Robin, and I once served a teenage couple, probably around 17 or 18, easily seniors in high school. They'd obviously been dating for a while since they already knew what they wanted and ordered for each other. The date night seemed to go pretty well. They ordered their drinks, ordered an appetizer, then ordered their food. Only their drinks had come out, yet when finally holding hands for a long while, the guy looks into the girl's eyes and apparently broke up with her. I'd been standing from a distance, keeping an eye on my tables, when suddenly I see this happening and watch the girl's face just turn from happiness to absolute horror. Tears well up and she starts banging her fists on the table, screaming out at him that he's a butthole and whatnot. Everyone in the restaurant can hear it and everything just stops. As she's becoming more and more volatile, he's trying to calm her down. I'm not sure what to do at this point. Even my manager had come out and looked at me as if we both don't know how to handle this. Finally, the guy yells, fine. If you don't want to be civil, then I'll go." She begs him to stay, but he pries himself away and beelines for the door. She doesn't follow him. He passes me on the way to the door, stops and walks back towards me. He hands me $50 and says, "You can obviously already see why I did what I did. I'm just sorry that you had to deal with this here and now. Take care of her and make sure she's okay." He then leaves. She sat for the next 3 hours, not crying but just staring blankly into the wall. She ate both of their meals and the tower of onion rings. On another note, a lady crapped herself at my work once. In short, broke up, broke down, and broke waistline. I'm somewhat unclear whether the lady that made brown in the server's workplace was one and the same person who ate the 2 meals and the tower of onion rings. It seems very probable, but it's written in such a way that they've preserved the mystery. Seems like the cherry or piece of gooey fudge on top of this miserable experience. Guy comes in alone and asks for a table for 2. I seat him in the corner in a booth where it's quiet and secluded. He says his date should be here any minute. I get him the beer he ordered and a bunch of chips and salsa. 20 minutes later, he's on his second beer and he promises me that she's going to be here soon. She just texted him and said she's on her way. I really don't care because it's really slow and I like the guy because he's super low maintenance. I brought him out some queso to go with the chips he was eating alone. An hour goes by. There were 2 instances of a single woman coming in saying she was meeting someone, and both of those women were directed to this guy. But neither of them were his date. Now I'm just kind of feeling bad for the poor fella. 3 hours after I sat him down, he had had 9 beers, and I brought him a few rounds of shots occasionally just because we, the entire staff, felt so bad for him. He was fricking lit. He goes out the back door to start chucking up in an alleyway, as his date finally walks through the door. I sat her down at their table, get her a drink, and then went out back to give the guy a smoke and let him know his date was here. He was not happy. I walked him back inside, sat him down, and watched them formally introduce each other. I didn't realize this was a blind date. I left awkwardly and immediately. They paid and left maybe 5 minutes after that, just enough for the lady to finish her drink. I guess she gave him a ride home, but I don't really know. I didn't think she was actually going to show up, otherwise I'd have cut him off well before that. Oh well, hope he got some action that night. Who does she think she is, showing up 3 hours late for a date? To be somewhat fair, when she did arrive, she looked like she'd been crying her eyes out and seemed incredibly flustered. I didn't want to pry, especially considering the drunk mess she was about to have a date with. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Well, I'm assuming bartending is close enough to serving staff since I did serve the food as well. I did this for a number of years, but one story, man, this stands out. This younger lady came in by herself, comes up to the bar, and says she'd like a table in the back alone. It's a slow night and I was working alone, so I sat her, brought her a drink. She's there for about an hour, has a couple of drinks, and keeps checking her phone. I finally ask her if she's expecting someone, and her response was a sad smile and a nod. Almost immediately after that, this guy, early 30s, comes in and asks for a table for two. This guy reeks of D-bag. On his arm is this slightly trashy, very early 20s girl who's already drunk, loud, and freaking obnoxious. She keeps talking about how lucky she is to finally get this guy out with her. How it's been the best first date ever. I get them their food order and they can barely keep their hands off each other. I also notice that the lady sitting by herself has gone white as a ghost and is shaking a little bit. She takes out her cell phone and takes a few pictures. About this point, I know what's going on and I just try to avoid it. Lady number one walks up, puts some papers down on the table and says, "We're getting divorced." She then looks at the lady, who turns out to be her little sister, and tells her to never talk to her again. She then comes up, pays for her meal, and walks out, leaving the most utterly destroyed first date I've ever seen. It was phenomenal. Yep, I got a few more of the details when she came back later. But her husband didn't know it was his sister-in-law. And this was not the first time he'd cheated, just the first time with the sister. So maybe a stretch, but I figured it was close. Yay, something I can finally answer. I once had a table where this guy came in for a blind date. When the girl got there, it was obvious she was already a little tipsy. Well, a little ways into the meal and after having one drink, she chucked up all over herself at the table. She went to the bathroom and the guy had to ask another server to go and check on her. In the bathroom, she also proceeded to empty her guts all over the toilet seat. I felt so bad for the guy, but he was so nice about it. He waited for her to get cleaned up and took her home. That must have been the most awkward car ride ever. We have a rich, middle-aged dude that comes in almost every Friday with a new date. A couple of servers I work with have a pool if the date will last shorter or longer than 30 minutes. Unders have won probably 70% of the time. I think the best story I heard from one of his dates was when he asked where the lady was from. She answered Miami and he told her to leave. Weird dude. I was a waitress in college. A couple came in and sat at my table. Just your average Minnesota man and a nice Latina lady. They started chatting and it immediately became clear to me that she speaks no English. None. It turns out I'm fluent in Spanish, so I went back to take their order, and I sat and translated for them for a bit. It was awkward, but okay. I went back a few minutes later to drop off their appetizer, and this man looks at me and says, "I can't do this. Tell her I'm leaving." I said, "No, absolutely not." He said, "Well, I'm leaving whether you tell her or not, so you probably should." As I started to panic, both of them just burst out laughing. Turns out they're regulars that have been married for 20 years. They were trolling me after a friend told them I spoke Spanish. That is devious and brilliant. I hope they tipped you supremely well, madam. This one starts out awkward, but it takes a bit of a turn. I'm a host. I sat a gentleman very well dressed named Greg, who told me he was meeting a girl for their first date. About half an hour passes and no one shows up. It's a Sunday night, so it's pretty slow. I came by and checked on him. He hadn't heard from her or anything. Another half hour, then another. He finishes his entree, pays, and walks up to me and says, "Damn, she's not coming. Whatever." I try to convince him to stick it out at the bar for a little bit, but he isn't having it. He leaves. 20 minutes later, a girl shows up. She says her phone is dead and her car broke down on the way to her date with a guy named Greg. I say he got fed up and left, and she starts to cry because she really thinks she messed up. I tell her it'll be okay. The guy signed up for a rewards program and we had his cell number. Officially, I'm not supposed to do this, but I called him back up and told him his date was here, and he didn't believe me, so I put her on the phone and he was back 20 minutes later. They seemed to really hit it off, and as he left he said, "Thanks man," and he slipped me a $5. The only direct tip I've ever gotten. They just came in together yesterday. It makes me really happy that they're still dating. I was working at a restaurant and this guy I'd met a few days before came in before my shift ended to wait for me. He was going to take me out as soon as I finished. He was a few hours early. I brought him a drink and told him it would be a while, and he said that was fine. The place got pretty busy, and after a while I noticed there was a girl sitting down with him having a drink. I went over to bring him another beer and she was drinking as well. I served them more drinks, he introduced her as an old friend from school, and she kind of just gave me a quick up and down, seemed annoyed, and started chatting away with him, giggling at everything he said. It was a bit weird to watch. My boss asked me if I could stay late because it had become so busy, but I said no. I'm actually going on a date and pointed him out. She laughed and said, "Really? With the guy who's been drinking with that other girl?" I sheepishly said yes. The girl had left just before I was done, but he was pretty drunk by that point, so I asked him if he still wanted to go, and he said, of course. Anyway, he ended up being so wasted that I left and went home. I went out with him again and again. He got way too drunk and passed out each time. I turned him down the next time he asked. About a year later, I was working at a different bar and they walked in newlyweds. I found this out when she told the bartender she wanted to beat me up or something because I was trying to take her man. She didn't, and I told the bartender what happened, but I'd be interested to hear how she perceived what was happening. So yeah, that was pretty much the most awkward first date I've seen while working as a waitress, and it was mine. So I work at Great American Cookies as a cake decorator, and we get "Will you be my date" cakes all the time. Sometimes the customers give us flowers or a card to give to the person that comes to pick it up. Like boyfriend orders cake, gives us a flower, girlfriend picks up cake, and we give her the flower. Kind of like singing messengers. One day an older male came up and ordered a cake for his wife's birthday and asked if we could give her an envelope as she was the one to pick it up. Just curious, we asked him what was in it. He said tell her to open it there with us and she'd tell us all about it, that it was a surprise. We agreed and he paid for the cake, and later that day the wife comes up and gets the cake and envelope. She loves her cake even though it's pretty simple, and opens the envelope as he had instructed. She starts bawling her eyes out. This guy had had us serve her the divorce papers. We noticed he was standing only a few feet away. He was a scumbag Steve if I've ever seen one. Long story short, we don't take envelopes without the customers telling us exactly what's inside from then on. Oh, and he got us to serve papers for free when anyone else would have charged $50. Didn't even tip us for having to deal with his crying, soon-to-be ex-wife. In short, scumbag Steve made a cake decorator serve his wife divorce papers when she came to pick up her birthday cake. Not really a waiter, but I worked as a barista and witnessed numerous obvious first dates. One time, this super nerdy guy brings in this pretty attractive girl. I'm rooting for him because I used to be quite nerdy and had a tough time with the ladies. Anyway, the guy starts talking on and on about his favorite sci-fi and fantasy books, as well as some card game that sounded similar to D&D. There's nothing wrong with those interests, but the girl was clearly not receptive. She was giving him all kinds of physical and verbal cues that she wanted to change the discussion. But this guy would not stop talking. While I was watching, I wanted to help him, tell him to change the subject or something, but I couldn't think of any smooth way to help him out. Maybe it was because he was nervous. He gets up to go to the bathroom and knocks the table, which causes the girl's hot latte to be spilled all over her front. He apologized profusely, but you could see that she had checked out of the date. She left after drying herself. I hope he found a girl that appreciates sci-fi books and Piers Anthony as much as he does. You should have spilled coffee on him to shut him up. Whisper to him, "You can thank me later." Mom comes in earlier that day and tells me she's helping her son plan his first date. She asked if I could help her make everything look really fancy and all the good stuff. I didn't have much to do that day, so I said, why not? I got everything ready for them. I held a great table with a great view of the ocean for them, chilled a bottle of apple cider by their table, got a dessert tray ready. It was fancy. Heck, I would have loved to go on that date. I kid you not, little Billy and Susie were staring at their cell phones the entire time. It was a dimly lit place, all you could see was the candlelight and their faces because of their phones. I was teed off. I'd been ready to give this kid a high five on the way out, to give him a "go get her, son." But no, I was ashamed instead. Oh, I also planned a proposal for this guy and all of their friends. He was supposed to do it on the beach before they came in, got cold feet and had to hide all of his friends. He texted us saying he'd do it on the table, got cold feet before dessert, and nothing. I was honestly feeding his friends all the bread we had in the place because we were waiting for them. Finally, he did it, she said yes, and we all cheered. Good times. Not a first date, but very awkward. A guy comes in with an escort and drops a good amount of money on booze at the bar. She then leaves a few hours later and he informs us that his wife is on her way to meet him for dinner and tips us an extra $200 to keep our mouths shut, keeping it classy. What was the most absurd, strict rule you had to live by growing up? My parents were horrible parents in general, but the most bizarre rule that my siblings and I put up with was that we weren't allowed to sneeze multiple times in a row. One sneeze? Fine. Another sneeze after some arbitrary number of minutes later? No problem. 2 sneezes in a row? Get yelled at for being unhygienic, even if you covered your mouth and nose properly, and for having no manners. God forbid if you sneezed thrice or more in a row. I have seasonal allergies, and one time my dad was in a particularly bad mood and caught me in a sneezing fit and grounded me for a week. I find it almost impossible to sneeze just once. After I open those floodgates, there's usually another 1 or 2 in the chamber ready to pop. I was grounded from the time I was 8 until I moved out. My stepmom would always find another reason to extend it, no matter how small, even just my bookcase being messy, and at some point it just became normal that I wasn't allowed to do anything, and my dad didn't bother to fight it. And grounding for me didn't just mean I couldn't play video games. It was everything. I had no access to any kind of tech. She took away my alarm clock when she found out I was using the radio on it, and I couldn't go outside. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't be up past 8. Yes, even in summer when I was 17. I couldn't leave my room without a good reason, and I wasn't allowed to be in my sister's room or talk to her at all. I lost my real mum at 5, and my stepmom came into the picture within the year. I was still nowhere near recovering and felt like she was trying to replace my mum, so of course I wouldn't call her mum or anything like that. She and my father married when I was 7 without asking me or my sister. 3 at the time. My little sister was only 1 when my mum died and didn't feel bad letting our stepmom be mum. She didn't know anything else. She loved my sister and hated me, and I started doing worse and worse in school, giving my stepmom reason enough in my dad's eyes to keep me grounded that whole school year. It just never stopped after that. When I was still quite young, she found a cover to an adult movie DVD I'd found in the trash, and gave me a whack with her belt. My grandparents, mum's side, got pictures of the bruises, but were too afraid that my dad would move me across the country to do anything. It was enough that she was never physical again, but she just started making me write sentences after that. It started out, "I will not lie" 100 times, but that didn't keep me busy long enough, so she kept adding to it every time I did something she didn't like. The worst was when I was 14 and I ate some stevia packets from the top of the fridge and told her I didn't know where the empty packets came from out of fear. I will not lie, I will not steal, God hates a thief, and sin is death. 10,000 times. Due by the end of the month, in December. While I was writing them out, she came by my door, didn't say a word, and just set her belt on the doorknob. That was about as bad as it got, and honestly, I consider myself lucky it never got worse. I went to my grandparents' house every weekend, and they tried to spoil me as best they could. They weren't rich, but they loved me and gave me everything they could. I wouldn't be anywhere near the kind of person I am today without them, and so I'm thankful that they were part of my life. They taught me how a family is supposed to show love, since my mum couldn't, my stepmom wouldn't, and my dad didn't know how. Damn, that stepmother is practically following some step-by-step walkthrough on how to traumatize someone throughout their upbringing, and that was downright neglectful of your dad. Hope you did okay later in life. My mother would come home from work occasionally and say, "I know you did something you weren't supposed to. Go to your room. You have 15 minutes to think about what you want to say. If you lie, you'll get double punishment." I would freak out and say anything I thought might be bad I did during the day. I watched TV and I wasn't supposed to. I forgot my textbook at school. I made fun of a girl at school. I climbed a tree, among other things. She'd ground me for a week and I would feel relieved it wasn't worse. The messed up thing is that she had no idea what bad thing I did. She just knew I would confess to anything and everything. Being raised religious, I always thought I was sinning. So this was a way for her to control me and ground me so she was comfortable with where I was when she had night shifts. My mom once kicked me out of the house for being gay, and I'm not even gay. My mum wanted me to be gay. Once a friend and I got wet in the rain on the way home, and she asked if we were going to use the shower. Both. At the same time. She brought towels for both of us. She was extremely disappointed when I told her I got a girlfriend. If I tooted, I was forced to spend 2 hours outside, even in the freezing winter. One day, I collapsed in the cold and was taken away from my mum after I was hospitalized for 3 hours after collapsing. I then lived with my grandparents for the rest of my childhood, and legally wasn't allowed to see my mum until I was 18. I guess it counted as child endangerment. Something less serious, my mum was paranoid that everyone and everything was a kidnapper. She hated the mailman on our route, so when I was young, 3 or 4 years old, my mum told me it was illegal to be outside when the mail came. About 11:15 every day, I'd see that truck coming. I'd hightail it inside the house, terrified that I'd be spotted. Fast forward 30 years, I genuinely still feel a tinge of panic in the smallest recesses of the back of my brain when I see the mailman arrive. Only now it's overpowered by the excitement of my latest Amazon package that I don't really need. My time to shine. No nail polish, no tights under dresses. No drinking tea, not allowed to watch anything with any cursing. Had to call my parents sir and ma'am, and now they're upset that I call them this instead of mum and dad, by the way, but it's what they asked me to do. Bedtime of 9:30 until I was 18. Parents took my phone at 9 p.m. every night when I was in high school and read through all of my texts. They were allowed to open my bank statements. Not a rule, but my parents would read my diary and go through my computer, and once left video cameras up while I was hanging out with a friend and talking. They loved to repeat things I'd said or written to me, just to let me know that I had no privacy. In elementary school, my parents sat me down and said, "We just want you to know, if you get pregnant while living with us, we will kick you out." My parents gave my dog away while I was at school one day without telling me. I was 9. And these days, they wonder why I never want to share anything with them. Geez, this is all rubbish. My mom would read my diary too, but she never told me. She'd read it and then try to trick me into lying about something I wrote so she could punish me. I didn't know she was doing this for years. She convinced me that God told her what I'd done and led her to test me. My dad didn't snoop into my things that I know of, but he loved to accuse me of wanting to do the deed with my brother's friends, while he himself tried to get with my classmate. She was 15, he was in his 50s. Aren't parents the best? The only thing I can't figure out is your no tea rule. Why? Did they think it was poisonous? Or anti-American? If you're American, that is. Oh, and why no tights? I wasn't allowed to wear dresses without tights, lest someone see the bare flesh of my thighs. Huh? I wasn't allowed to swim in public swimming schools because I'd catch transmissible diseases from them, apparently. When my PE class would go to the pool 1 week a year, I had to walk laps around the pool because I couldn't participate. My stepdad typed up and printed a 5-page list of rules. He made me print, sign, and date the last page. I was to be held accountable, and if any rules were broken, I had to move out. I wasn't a bad kid. The whole thing was to establish his dominance of me. I wasn't allowed to leave my room. I couldn't go to the bathroom or kitchen, but I better have a reason to be there. So the narrator came to this story grouping mostly hoping for goofy rules about weirdos who are legally obligated to pledge fealty to the family cat every morning or something. Instead, we have the usual stories of conservative Christian repression and just downright imprisoning their kids. Sad stuff. Holding out for something goofier. I couldn't shave my legs until I was 16. I did when I was 12. My mum found out and grounded me. I had to ask to get a drink of anything or eat anything. I couldn't go anywhere unless my little brother could go with me too, or if he had a play date. If he didn't have anyone to play with, then I couldn't either. We were 8 years apart, by the way. Nobody in my house was allowed to get the mail except my dad. Doesn't matter what time he got home, leave the mail in the mailbox. He'd also personally open all the mail no matter the recipient. He'd always know if anyone touched it. To clarify, we aren't in piles of debt, I'm not Harry Potter, and I think he just likes control. My parents were super laid back, but my mother's stepdad Larry could be a huge butthole. She told me that one morning, as a kid, she was given a chocolate-covered donut, and, as a kid will do, decided to start nibbling off the chocolate. Larry decided this annoyed the crap out of him and asked her promptly to stop eating the donut like that. "Oh, just let her eat the donut how she wants," said Mum's mum, washing dishes. My mum continues to eat chocolate around the edges, and Larry shoots up, shouting, "Knock that off!" and fricking pitches his morning cup of coffee across the kitchen, where it explodes on the wall next to Mum's mum. I'm thankful that Larry was not in my mother's life for long. If you're out there, Larry, F you. As a kid, I loved to drink the milk out of the bowl after eating the cereal. One day I stayed over at a friend's house for a sleepover. In the morning, I had some cereal and proceeded to drink directly from the bowl as I always had. I was told off and I thought, fine, drinking like that is a little rude. I'll just drink it by using the spoon, like you drink soup. I was told off for that too. I was like, what should I do with this milk? We don't like to waste food at my house, so it gets eaten or in the fridge, and the idea of just pouring it down the sink baffled me. I once got grounded for 2 months because my school bus was late. Backstory. I was 12 years old when this happened. A couple of kids almost got into a fistfight before the school bus left the parking lot, and the bus driver had to get the principal to break it up and escort them back into the school. The bus driver lectured us about fighting before driving us home. This caused us to be 30 minutes late. When I explained this to my mother, she blamed the whole situation on me, which was completely irrational because 1, I barely knew the kids who were involved, and 2, I was an introvert, bookworm type who never got into a fight. Oh, and 3, if I'd been in the fight, I would have been taken to the principal's office for punishment instead of being allowed to ride the bus home. She made a rule that I would be grounded every time the bus was late going forward regardless of the reasoning. I grew up in the northwest part of the US, so even when the bus driver had to drive home slowly because of snow, I would still get punished. Needless to say, I wasn't allowed out of the house much in middle school or high school. I once got grounded because I did the dishes without having to be reminded. My mum said that I was trying to manipulate her and that I must have only done it because I was trying to get something out of her. In reality, all I wanted out of her was to stop yelling at me about how I never do the dishes without having to be reminded. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. If you didn't instantly say what you wanted to eat, my father would cook onions and garlic. He didn't like people wasting his time. My grandmother made me write out the encyclopedia entry on witchcraft when she found out I'd read the first 4 Harry Potter books, if that counts. Oh no, my kid might learn witchcraft. Better have them copy an article on actual witchcraft. I had a stepdad who was a police officer, and all this occurred until I was 15. 1, I had to eat beans first on my plate and then clockwise. If I didn't follow this rule, I'd get no food and kicked from the dinner table. 2, I couldn't listen to Vanilla Ice because it was black music. 3, I had to stand in the corner with both feet on the floor and back straight for hours. 4, I had a time limit on hugging my mother. If we hugged too long, he called me gay slurs. 5, I had to get up in the morning and sit on the toilet and shine his leather while he showered. 6, I couldn't shut the door to go number 2. 7, I couldn't shut the door to shower or bathe. 8, if my bed squeaked at night, I'd get whipped because he thought I was whacking it. Oh yeah, and there were more. I'm a mid-30s straight male and in a professional career. This happened from '84 to 1997 in southern US. This is just the surface stuff. I didn't even mention the stuff I knew was off growing up. He's retired on police pension, living off the state. He never had a single charge formally put in his jacket or his criminal record. Mum was definitely having a rough time of it too. No one in the house was allowed to shave or have a razor at all. I couldn't go to a barber or shave at a friend's house, but had my PC taken away when I tried at home. I still don't understand my mother's logic behind this one. I wasn't allowed to shave my legs. I guess my mom's thinking was that all the hair would serve as boy repellent. It wasn't necessary though, my personality was more than enough to keep me from getting laid. As much as some of the other stuff has surprised me, the repeated rule of no leg shaving across some of these posts is something I didn't even contemplate could happen. Fundamentalist religious people, treat your kids better. Your daughters shouldn't be your prisoners. My dad wrote contracts for me, including clauses like daily wake-up times, bedtimes, times to eat and what I ate, chores, homework, studying, and sports schedules, and strict rules and regulations regarding how I spent my free time, such as 30 minutes of computer use or video games, 1 hour of television, 1 sleepover per month, etc. If I didn't follow my schedule to the dot, missed sports practice or a game, failed to do a chore, or failed to get a 4.0 on every report card, I would be super grounded, as my friends referred to it. Basically, I had to read quietly in my room. I wasn't even allowed outside. I had to sign these contracts and commit to them, or I'd be sent to military school, which is where I spent every summer after 7th grade, taking classes anyways. As a result of these classes, I was a couple of grades ahead with math, English, and science, and was still expected to make perfect marks every semester. I was grounded virtually all the time, but luckily my parents had joint custody, and I escaped to my mother's house as much as possible. Also, mandatory substance testing from age 14 onward. Don't even get me started on what he would have done if he knew how much I smoked. I fought for sole custody to belong to my mother when he finally decided that, having caught me in the act with my girlfriend at the time, he was going to send me to a military academy 4 hours away. Nope, haven't spoken to him in almost 6 years. My dad was raised with the idea that kids essentially have no opinion, which he passed on to my sister and I. If we were doing anything and he or my mum needed us to do something else, we were expected to immediately drop it and go do the other thing, which doesn't sound that bad until I'd be in the middle of painting or something else messy and be called to do the dishes, then in the middle of the dishes be called to clean up the original mess, then to go clean that up and be yelled at for not finishing the dishes. And Lord help me if I said just a minute or anything like that. This sounds like a manager I had. Do tasks A, B, and C. I'll start task A. Why isn't C done yet? Drop A and start C. Why haven't you finished A yet? Go back to A. Wait, what about C? And why haven't you finished B yet? Stupid. Leave me alone and my job would take half the time. They were also fond of, well, why didn't you do X? When I'd tell her the extra tasks I did in downtime. Oh, you vacuumed, dusted, and washed the cabinets? Why didn't you clean the windows? My mom used to not allow me to watch any movies that had magic in them. Jumanji was considered demonic. I didn't even see The Little Mermaid until I was 16. I didn't watch The Princess and the Frog until I'd moved out. I was also banned from reading or watching Harry Potter. I managed to sneak that in at the age of 20. Mom never caught me and Dad didn't care. My dad wouldn't let me go out at all. The only time he'd let me leave the house was to walk to school, and even then, he had to walk me to the entrance. I was teased all the time. Due to my isolated upbringing, I'm very socially awkward, and he wonders why I won't go out and find myself a partner. He never raised my sisters that way, just me. He also wouldn't let me chew gum. He'd flip out. He's physically pried my mouth open to take the gum out. He's such a bizarre, controlling man. My mom didn't allow candy. Once I snagged a box of Valentine Hearts candy from preschool. Yes, I was about 4 or 5 and smuggled them home. Out of the goodness of my heart, I decided to share them with my undeservedly revered older brother. Said brother quickly decided that getting free candy was nowhere near as entertaining as me being punished and humiliated, and told my mom I was eating contraband candy. So, like any reasonable adult would do, she freaked out and pulled a Valentine heart out of my mouth while I was trying to eat it. Moral of the story? Never trust anyone. Could never have my door shut because, as a kid, I don't pay any bills, so I'm not running anything around here. My mum and I didn't get along and she did this count to 3 thing. I used to get in trouble for stuff I didn't do, so I got sent to my room a lot. I'd then refuse to go there, so she came up with this rule where she would add an extra hour every time I talked back after she got to 3. I ended up spending 8 hours in my room once because my sister lied about me doing something. My mum tried something similar with me. She told me I'd be grounded 1 day for every minute late I was home after curfew. It worked a couple of times when I was only a little late. One night I checked the time and was already 20 minutes late, so I just came home at 4:30 a.m. She didn't ground me for 270 days, thankfully. We came to a new, more reasonable agreement that morning. We had to drink a glass of lemon juice right before bed. Pure, freshly squeezed lemon juice. A whole glass. Timer went on for 10 minutes. If it went off and you weren't finished, whack on the butt. Set timer and repeat until the lemon juice was gone. I did okay, maybe 1 whack on the butt. But my sister has a terrible gag reflex, so she really got it bad. As you can imagine, being 5 and going to bed like that makes for some nasty heartburn and nausea. As a medical professional, do you get acid reflux nowadays? How about your siblings? Your parents might have caused GERD, which could lead to throat cancer. This is some pretty serious stuff. Go get your esophagus checked out. Unless your parents are waging some very poorly informed war on scurvy, I can't for the life of me find a reason why this rule would be a thing unless you just like watching your kids suffer, to be honest. After I turned 9 years old, I wasn't allowed to watch cartoons anymore because that's not what men did. I hated my dad for it. He was your typical dad that forces society's standard masculinity down my throat. I definitely rebelled and still watched cartoons. I'm 24 and still enjoy a good cartoon or anime. I was raised religious and my mum invented a concept called micro-sinning. So we had a rule where I had to be home by 11. If I made it home at 10:50, I was punished because it was too close to 11 and I was being defiant. Jesus died for our micro-sins. My parents were all over the place with strictness. When I was old enough to drive, my younger sister and I would drive to McDonald's, just a few miles away. My parents would admonish us, "Whatever you do, do not eat French fries in the car." Invariably, we'd get home, they would run out, open the doors, sniff, and start screaming at us for eating French fries in the car. We never did. When Nintendo, the original, first came out, my cousin got one for Christmas. We were poor, so he brought it over so we could try it out. Nope. The new rule became no video games hooked up to the TV because it would ruin the TV. FYI, they still believe this to be true and still only have one TV. Couldn't watch Disney movies as a child because they showed kissing before marriage. Wasn't allowed to go to friends' houses or let them give me a ride home from school because I'd be imposing on their parents. Mum went through my trash to make sure I didn't throw out anything important. The rule was that my mum had to pick out my friends because she didn't want me hanging out with anyone who wasn't Catholic or who was into satanic content. To my mum, everything was satanic. So basically, just about everyone I brought home was influenced by the devil because their parents let them listen to modern pop music and watch Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z, mid to late 90s. Visiting their homes was strictly forbidden on account of the fact that the only opinions she wanted me to have were hers and hers only. It also didn't help when I wanted to play at the park with my friends and my mum would literally follow us and watch us the entire time. Eventually, no one wanted to be my friend anymore, and that was when the bullying began. This torture went on for 7 years. Then my mum wondered why I didn't have any friends and was bullied for such a long time. It was a miracle that I even had friends when high school came along. Needless to say, I'm not a Catholic anymore, and my mum and I are not on good terms. There was a crap ton of crazy rules living with my parents, mainly from my mum. My dad only followed to avoid arguments. But this rule was the one that affected me the most. What was the best gotcha moment that you've seen go down in court? A lady got into a minor fender bender with a truck in a casino parking lot. She backed out of a spot into him. My guy said she had parked and went inside the casino for a few hours. At her deposition, she testified that she was so hurt that she went right home and to a hospital. I asked if she was a frequent visitor of the casino and if she had a rewards card. She was happy to tell me that she did, and she had gold status, and showed me the card. I subpoenaed her rewards card records, and it showed she was playing slots for hours after the accident. My client's house burned down from an explosion in the fuel oil tank used to heat the house. It was clearly the oil maintenance company's fault, but his homeowner's insurance, from a very reputable company, still refused to pay out, citing a ridiculous technicality in his policy. Essentially, the policy covered damage caused by the oil heater, but they claimed that it was the storage tank that exploded and wasn't part of what was covered. So they deny his claim, which was about $1.2 million, and then I get involved. During a deposition with the claims adjuster, I ask how she came to the conclusion that the storage tank was not a part, or at least not connected to the heater. She states that she relied on her expert witness, who was an engineer. Little did she know I'd already checked this person's background. He had zero engineering experience or education. As most of you might know, you don't get attorney's fees in most cases. However, when an insurance company denies your claim in bad faith, now you do. Her little admission cost the company about $500,000 in fees, on top of the original claim for $1.2 million. Plaintiff had an X-ray of an allegedly broken arm. It seemed off to me and the dates didn't make sense. I was in-house at an academic medical center. I looked at the case more closely and discovered that the plaintiff was an X-ray tech at another hospital. After that, it was all over. I was trying to get a restraining order for a woman in DV court from her son's father. We were presenting testimony and she detailed a story where he grabbed her arm and slammed it on the tub, breaking her wrist. On cross, I asked the accused if he ever broke my client's wrist on purpose. His response, "Frick yeah, I did. She was 9 months pregnant and about to do smack and wouldn't stop. I tried to grab her arm to get the pipe and protect my unborn son." Frick me. She left that detail out in her conversations with me. Well, that's a moral conundrum that could be put in a philosophy course. Actually, no, just call the cops on your wife. Sucky situation anyway, though, all told. I had a former client file for bankruptcy, and in connection with that case, brought an action against his landlord for violating the automatic stay. In order to prove the damages, he wanted to show he paid my firm for legal fees in connection with the landlord's pursuit of rent in violation of the stay. So this former client's bankruptcy lawyer serves me a subpoena to show up at the bankruptcy hearing. He didn't ask me any questions prior, but just gave me the gist of what the objective was. In this case, to verify with the court the time I spent and the cost to his client. The bankruptcy attorney called his client, my former client, to the stand first. He asked him questions related to his hiring my firm to do this and that as it related to his landlord. Apparently, that's not enough. The bankruptcy attorney wants me to verify these facts as well. I get put on the stand and I was asked to verify the invoice. I first object to the question as a precaution, since it may be a violation of attorney-client privilege to answer the question, and to cover me for any claim by the bar or my former client. As predicted, the judge overrules and orders me to answer. I review the invoice and answer, "No, this is not my invoice." His attorney says, "I don't understand. This is your firm's logo and information, right?" "Yes." "And you provided these legal services, right?" "No." A very confused attorney slowly started to put together, after a couple more follow-up questions, that this idiot client of ours had manufactured my invoice to prove his damages. Needless to say, I could have given his new attorney the heads up, but I wasn't going to help someone who'd committed perjury to the court using my name. I'd represented him in a completely different matter, and this guy was trying to make some extra cash through his bankruptcy hearing. 2 lessons. Tell your attorneys everything, and as an attorney, make sure your client feels comfortable telling you everything. Cross-examining a custom home builder who had a lump sum contract, set price as opposed to cost plus, which means cost of the materials plus the builder's fee, with the homeowner. Claimed he put 20% more labor and materials into building the home than the contract had provided for, and he was suing for those excess costs. I was asking him about an email with my client negotiating the price of the construction, and he volunteers that he knew he couldn't build it for that price. My head snaps up. Supervising partner's head snaps up and the opposing counsel goes pale. Dialogue was something like, "You quoted this price?" And the builder said, "Yes." "And you knew you couldn't build it for that price?" The builder said, "Yes." "You knew the homeowner was relying on that quote?" "Yes." "You knew the homeowner wouldn't have signed the contract without that representation?" "Yes." "And you told homeowner's lender that you could do it for this amount?" "Yes." "And the bank relied on that price and wouldn't have given loan if they knew it was wrong?" "Yes." This is textbook fraudulent inducement and he had no idea. Builder got poured out in the arbitration award and slapped the builder with a sizable punitive damages on top of it. 5 minutes of testimony sunk his case because he volunteered information without being prompted. The plaintiff alleged he was so injured in an auto accident that he couldn't work or do any regular activities or pick up his young kids. He then posted on his public Facebook profile him doing the ice bucket challenge. If you're not familiar, he basically lifted a huge cooler filled with ice water over his head. His attorney had no idea that he'd posted it. "I once heard about a man who got a doctor to do him a report for his compo claim. Can't bend, can't lift, can't run, etc. Problem was he had a paternity suit ongoing at the same time. Got the same doctor to write a report for that case. No restrictions on mobility, can pick up kid, play with him, etc. As you can guess, he and the doctor got caught. Recent and pretty good, I represented a guy whose car died in the middle of the freeway at 4 a.m. He put his hazard lights on and called 911 for help. At the same time, an LAPD cop heading to work around the same time in a police unmarked car was driving around 87 to 92 miles per hour. Per our deconstructionist, he didn't see our guy and strikes him, causing a major 6-car collision, including overturning an 18-wheeler truck. The police arrive and take photos. The LAPD officer claimed our guy didn't have his hazard lights on, and he was only driving 60 miles per hour. He was trying to put some of the fault on our guy. At the deposition of the investigating officer, she doesn't remember if our guy's hazard lights were on or not. The attorney brings him photos of the scene. One of the photos showed my guy's hazard lights on. We were dismissed shortly thereafter. Not so much a gotcha as it is the defendant giving themselves up. When I worked for insurance defense, I handled a fraud case where a man reported his Rolex as being stolen. He was so adamant that he was at a hotel and it was stolen. He's shown no proof of being in a hotel, so it's flagged. We go through the whole process and finally reached depositions. He gets sworn in and eventually left out that he wasn't at a hotel, but rather with his mistress and had left it at her house. His wife noticed he didn't have it on, so he immediately claims it was stolen. Yeah, right. This man decided to hire an attorney and go through this whole circus just so his wife wouldn't find out about his affair. Needless to say, the claim was denied. I mean, the fellow in question is a gigantic sack of crap, but I guess if he wants to save what's left of his marriage, that's clearly failing by his own fault. Go ahead. Lying always works, right? When I was in the military, I was accused of something I didn't do, and I had to go to court over it. And during court, the prosecutor started to detail this investigation and how they'd staked my apartment out for months. They entered into evidence a picture of my apartment, and when they put it up, I looked shocked at my lawyer because it wasn't a picture of my place. It was my ex-wife's apartment, a place I'd never lived, never spent a single night there. I lived in a house, she lived in an apartment. And when my lawyer asked if she objected to the picture being entered into evidence, she replied, "I don't mind them entering it into evidence as long as they change the listing of it." And when one of the members of the panel, no judge, 3 members board, asked what was wrong with the listing, she looked at him and said, "That's not his apartment." On top of this, the witness they used against me described going to my house on the night in question, and she named the subdivision where she had visited me, except that wasn't where I lived either. Also wasn't where the picture they had was either. The case was dismissed and I was told they requested the witness to return to answer questions about perjury. I lived with a guy when we were in our early 20s. He worked for one of those crappy furniture rental places where people without money get furniture. Much of his job was repossessing furniture, and in his spare time he was a skateboarder. He severely hurt his back on the job and they were contesting paying his bills and settling. At one of his mediation dates, they revealed they'd hired a private investigator to follow him. They showed him pictures of himself at a skate park skating when he was supposed to be home recovering. They asked him to verify it was him. He said no. These doofuses had somehow missed that he had a twin brother who also skated. They eventually settled for what I thought was a very low $70,000. He had back pain for years that caused him to gain weight and suffer. In his 30s, he finally had back surgery and he regretted not doing it 10 years earlier. He said it completely alleviated the pain. I had a client accused of leading the cops on a high-speed chase. The cop on the stand estimated he was going 90 miles per hour but never actually clocked him. Then the cop identified where the chase started with me and where it ended. It lasted about 2 miles. Then we went through his log of when it started and when it ended. About 3.5 minutes. Once you walk through the math on that, the average speed of this chase was 35 miles per hour. The client got acquitted really quickly after that. A friend of mine got pulled over once. I was in the car with him. When the cop approached us, he said, "Do you know how fast you were going?" I had to go 70 to catch up. My only thought was, how does that matter? It's not like it'd catch up by matching our speed. I'm still confused by that interaction. It sounds like police officers don't know what relative velocity is. The first case I ever did, opposing counsel misplaced the copy of my client's driver's license. Rather than admitting his mistake and asking me to resend it, he filed a motion to compel, claiming we never sent it. Well, I was able to provide proof that we'd sent it to him like 8 months ago, so the judge was rather displeased with his antics. The judge was rather displeased with his antics? Not a lawyer, but this tends to be my impression with judges who catch people doing shady stuff. I remember once, during undergrad, being an intern with a probation office and the case ahead of our revocation hearing had a guy pleading guilty. During his rambling and disjointed allocation, the judge frowned. "So why are you pleading guilty exactly?" And the guy replied, "My lawyer told me to." The judge was most displeased when he questioned the guy further and found out the guy had no concept of what he was doing or what the potential sentencing could be. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Represented a DUI client who swore up and down to me that he hadn't been drinking or doing any substances. A newbie officer who had his field training officer with him in the car. The rookie pulls the client over for a tag violation, walks back to the car with the body camera still on, and the training officer, FTO, says to him, "Get him out for a DUI," and the rookie says, "But he's not intoxicated." To which the reply was, "Do it anyway." The body cam clicks off, turns on 7 minutes later when they're doing field sobriety exercises on my client. The client sat in custody for 3 weeks until I finally got the tape from the prosecutor and presented it to the judge. The "oh crap" looks from the prosecutor and field training officer when the judge saw the tape, I'll treasure those. The judge wrote the police chief a letter saying that the field training officer was dead to him and he'd deny every search warrant he tried to bring thereafter for being a liar. The client is hopefully still on track with his civil attorney in a lawsuit. I was suing a landlord who failed to make serious repairs in order to force the tenant out. The hard part is proving bad intent instead of mere idiocy, so you get higher damages. Code enforcement was involved, so I request those records. The landlord left a voicemail to the enforcement department saying to hold off on the fines. They'll make the repairs as soon as the tenant is forced out. That was an easy case. Some crap like this happened to my dad. The landlord refused to make repairs, the washer was busted, garbage disposal was leaking, and forced floorboards to warp. My dad moved and wanted his deposit. They wouldn't give it to him. He took them to court. He took pictures before he left and kept all texts from them. They walked themselves into a corner with everything they said. My dad was prepared for every claim. Eventually, the judge told my dad he could fight it until the end and get his whole deposit, or the landlord could give most of it now and it would be over. He took the deal because he didn't have time for court, and the look of anger and defeat on the landlord's face was too satisfying. I had a client whose $60,000 car was ruined by a shop that put in the wrong oil. We couldn't prove it at first. The engine blew up and oil leaked out and evidence was lost. I subpoenaed their bank records. I figured out they brought their oil from Costco. Called Costco and got their prices list for the last 2 years. I worked out the amounts they were spending, did some backhand math, and showed, based on the values, it was impossible they ever bought the correct oil. They settled in full immediately. This is just satisfying. Not a massive slip-up on the defendant's behalf like a lot of these others, just a good bit of clever sleuthing and voila, the magician has turned a "this didn't happen" into a "we admit everything." Chef's kiss. Worked as a paralegal and investigator. Working a trade secrets case involving the manufacturer of dental wheels used to grind teeth. Long story, but go with it. Company A was a small family-owned manufacturer, but made the best product on the market from a small factory in the middle of nowhere. Sold massive amounts of product because of quality. Its location was remote enough and the owner paid employees so well the employees stayed there. Forever. All of them had worked there for more than 30 years. When the founder of the company died, it was sold to International Company B because the kids and grandkids had no interest in the company. Company B then closed the old factory and tried to use Company A's formula at their facilities. Company B couldn't make the formula work. Now, enter Company C, another international company who lost the bid on buying Company A. When Company C heard about the problems Company B was having, they brought the old factory facilities and then rehired the old staff to restart production. All the employees of old Company A were delighted to have their good-paying jobs back and went straight to work, producing the better quality items once again, and Company C's product worked. Company B sues Company C for trade secrets violation. When you buy a company, you buy their trade secrets, and this company had a bunch. The product was just one part, but the most profitable part of their operation. Thus, Company C, because of their action, was accused of violating the laws governing trade secrets. Company B even managed to get a temporary restraining order against Company C in federal court, and Company C had to stop manufacturing at the old plant they now owned. This is when I enter the picture. Our firm represented Company C, and I was assigned to interview all of the employees. I was in the living room of this delightful older lady in her late 50s that offered me snacks and asked me if I was married and wanted to set me up with her granddaughter, you name it. Best and funniest interview ever. Then she drops the bomb. I asked her how she knew how to make the product. All my previous interviews said so, and so taught them. She said, "From the directions on the wall." Total moment of silence. Directions on the wall? "Yes," she said. "No one ever looks at them, but there's a board on the wall with the directions." I called the janitor of the facility from her phone, this is before cell phones, and had him meet me there. He unlocks the place and covered in probably 40 years of dust, making it just part of the background, is a board with the entire process on it. Thus, when Company B sold the factory, which was eventually purchased by Company C, Company B accidentally sold the trade secrets to Company C because they abandoned it on the wall. I did serious evidence sourcing on this. My best pictures were of this 65 or older former janitor knocking the dust off the pages, taking the entire board off the wall, putting it in a paper bag and sealing it so I never touched it. Every picture he smiled for the camera. His "frick you" expression was priceless in every picture. They were so fricking funny. The judge in federal court was laughing his butt off when he heard the details of what I found to reverse the restraining order. When he opened the bag, he laughed even more. The factory reopened immediately. Company B and C settled by agreeing that they both got to use the trade secret but couldn't sell it to anyone else. What they really figured out was those little old ladies had slightly changed the formula over the years and made them slightly better over time. Even the formula on the wall didn't work as well as those little ladies did. My brother is an attorney. He had a case where the guy said he was permanently disabled from a work accident. At a deposition, my brother overheard the guy talking about getting his house remodeled. He was already spending the money he thought he was getting. My brother drove by the house to see how much work was being done and saw the guy carrying bundles of roofing shingles up a ladder to the roof. This was before smartphones, so he drove to a Best Buy and brought a video camera, went back and recorded the guy. He had copies made and sent it to the other attorney. The guy dropped the suit and went back to work the following Monday. My brother's client didn't want to pay for the video camera. It saved them thousands of dollars. They eventually paid, but he still gets a little teed off when he talks about it. I'm amazed the initial guy's company even took him back after he tried to pull that stunt. Certainly wouldn't have helped his chances at future claims. Sucks to suck, although clearly his bosses sucked a bit too. Legal videographer. This gentleman was claiming injuries and seeking damages against his employer after a fall at work. He claimed he couldn't raise his right arm above his shoulder because of the fall. First deposition comes along and I'm hired by defendant's attorney to videotape deposition of the plaintiff. Anyone know the first thing a court reporter asks you to do in a deposition? Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. The plaintiff raises his right arm above his shoulder with ease and no sign of discomfort. It doesn't occur to him what he's done. Both attorneys were looking down at their notes when this happened and neither of them caught it. The plaintiff himself didn't catch it. The court reporter looked at him and then looked at me, and her eyes went wide with realization at what had just happened. 4 hours of depositions proceed where the plaintiff is instructed, multiple times, to show his range of motion and proceeds to pretend like he can't raise his arm above the shoulder level, which he did at the very beginning of this deposition. Deposition ends, plaintiff's counsel leaves, I call defense, the hiring party, counsels over, and show them the first 2 minutes of the tape. The counsel excitedly whispers to me, "Case closed. You've just saved us tens of thousands of dollars." I got a $5,000 bonus and the plaintiff's case was dismissed with prejudice. This is so petty. I've had much bigger moments, but because of the character of the other side, this will always be my favorite. Doing a boundary dispute, a squabble over what was essentially a few inches of land. The other side was a lawyer and an absolute butt. He was acting for himself. The whole, a lawyer who acts for himself has a fool for a client thing was bang on for him, but he was a deeply unpleasant guy, a bully who thought that he was the smartest guy in the room. Part of his case hinged on wheelie bins and how prior to the boundary having been moved, there wasn't space to store a full-sized bin beside the house. The fact that you now could meant clearly the boundary must have moved. That was the extent of his evidence. It was really thin stuff. During the actual trial, he pulled a fast one by suddenly producing an old aerial photo, ostensibly to show the boundary at the front of the property had also moved. A fast one because you have to disclose stuff like that in advance, you can't just sit on something relevant and then suddenly whip it out at a trial with a flourish. While he was making his submissions that it should be admissible, I looked more closely at it, away from the bit of the boundary he said it was relevant to, and realized that it very clearly showed a wheelie bin in exactly the spot his case said there couldn't be one. Told the judge we were happy for the photo to be admitted after all, and got the other side to confirm the date it was taken, and then pointed out he'd just completely messed up his own case. That photo did him for nearly $50,000 in adverse costs. Couldn't happen to a more deserving chap. My client was a woman working at a meatpacking plant. Her glove, they'd only give her the loose kind because they were cheaper, got caught in the machine and she lost her arm. We sued the owners of the plant for the glove issue. We also sued the machine manufacturer for failing to include the required guard. Then we sued the distributor for being in the chain of the sale, but didn't really think they played that much of a role. The manufacturer swore that they included a handguard and said the plant owner must have used a grinder to take it off. During a deposition of the guy that owned the distributing company, he shows up with the sale documents he was supposed to have turned over weeks before. Turns out there was a note in the small print at the bottom he didn't know about that said the sale was without the handguard, which is against the law. I pointed it out and we ended up settling that afternoon with the distributor. The woman got all her medical bills paid, got money for a prosthetic, and got a bunch of pain and suffering damages. How do cops tell the guilty people apart from the ones who are just nervous? I knew a police helicopter pilot and I asked a similar question when searching for suspects. He said that the bad guys were the ones not looking up at the helicopter. Innocent people point, look, and stare. I thought it was funny, but true to a point. I was taking the bins out one dark night and there was a police helicopter nearby. All of a sudden, they lit me up with the spotlight. I was like a deer in the headlights, and after a second or two, slowly waved at them, and then after a few more seconds, the spotlight moved on elsewhere. It was so awkward, they must have been peeing themselves laughing. Pulled over for being lost in the wrong neighborhood. Was relieved as I didn't have GPS at the time and was horribly lost. I'd been hoping that the cop who'd been tailing me for the last mile would pull me over to get directions. They wanted to know why a white boy like me was in a neighborhood like this. I explained that I'm lost. Doesn't believe me. Says I'm here for substances. My whole attitude changed because I was suddenly nervous. Why would he think that? And realizing that this could go badly. He says only guilty people act nervous. He ends up calling a K9 unit to search my car. The other cop is really cool. We chat and he apologized for the first cop being a jerk. After search, he gives me directions on how to get to my destination. Good cop, bad cop is real. I got pulled over for speeding on Canada Day, on my way up to Ottawa from Toronto. Did the usual routine of pulling over somewhere safe, taking the registration out and putting both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. The cop approaches and I ask if it's okay for me to reach over and turn down the music, which I forgot to do. He starts laughing and says okay. He tells me to put my hands down since I'm making him nervous. I'm like, you're making me nervous. Back in Toronto, I don't take chances, and the cops are usually appreciative. But they've never told me to relax. It's best to err on the side of caution with Toronto police. But out of the city, cops are usually pretty laid back. We had a good old Canadian laugh, wished each other a happy Canada Day, and then he gave me a ticket for 115 in a 100. The funny thing is, I'm an off-duty cop, and around a uniformed officer I don't know, different department or area, I get nervous. Hell, my heart sometimes skips a beat when I see one of our own cars driving down the road, even though it might be the exact same vehicle I was assigned to just a few hours ago. My point is, I think pretty much everyone gets nervous around cops. Most people will avoid you and not make eye contact. But what really stands out for me are the adults that will periodically look at you, or you feel them staring at you like they're trying to ID your face. I've had to arrest a lot of people over the years, and many of them are back out on the streets. Perhaps as a cop, he's aware of how poorly things can go. I don't think literally everyone gets nervous around cops. The narrator has never had that healthy fear. Maybe one day when I'm wrongfully victimized, that will change. UK police officer here. There's no single factor, but there's a few things I'd look out for. Police aware is an expression we use. Like the last guy said, most people feel guilty and try to act normal around the police, which normally means pretending we're not there. You can begin to concentrate on eating that sandwich to an almost comic extent while sneaking the odd look to see what the copper's doing. Then you have the people who stop what they're doing and watch you intensely to see if you're coming for them. These are the people who are police aware. Of course, sometimes they're just tourists hoping to take a sneaky photo of a British copper. Mostly it's people whose appearance or manner doesn't fit in. For example, if you go to a busy taxi rank at a rush hour and then just casually mooch about rather than queuing or leaving, then that's an odd thing to do. If you walk into an expensive shop wearing tatty clothes and with ingrained dirt on your hands, then that's an odd thing to do. If you walk into a bar, order a drink, then leave it on the counter, then that's odd as well. And probably means you're either passing counterfeit money or pickpocketing. None of these things is illegal, but they're all things that are not entirely normal and would attract the eyes of an observant police officer. Don't misinterpret these examples as looking scruffy. That's not what I mean at all. It's about not fitting in because of your context, not just a sudden bout of, I'm normal, from someone who clearly has a reason to be where they are. Visible signs of substance use. Sometimes in the UK you'll hear the term smack diet, but the same would be true for crystal in the US. You can spot addicts from a mile away, because they have the same look and behaviors. Without wishing to tar all addicts with the same brush, hard substance addiction and acquisitive crime often go hand in hand. So when I see someone who's clearly an addict, I'm immediately interested in them. Lastly, there's intelligence. A lot of what we do is guided by specific knowledge about an area. In some areas, I'll be looking out for teenage kids hanging around bike racks. In others, I'll be looking out for substance addicts meeting dealers. In others, I'll still be looking for bag thieves amongst drinkers. Anyone who matches the sort of person who I'm on the lookout for, who also gets jumpy, is going to pique my interest. But normal people, less so. Sorry it's such a rambling answer, the truth is there are many factors and it just depends. A good friend of mine works as a lawyer for one of the bigger insurer companies in defense. A good percentage of accidents happen because people freak out about the mere presence of the cop and don't focus on the actual driving. Like literally during a deposition, I didn't see them pull out, there was a cop on the same road. In medicine, we have a similar phenomenon called white coat hypertension. Being in the mere presence of a doctor raises patients' blood pressure. So a patient may have a normal blood pressure, but every time they step into the office to get it checked, it goes up. Going to the doctor can be bad for your health sometimes. I'm one of these jumpy people. I've been pulled over and screamed at, "Why are you so nervous? What are you hiding?" And another time, the cop was very nice and just said, "Relax, it's just a ticket. Are you okay? Do you want to catch your breath? It's not a big deal. Take a couple of deep breaths, buddy." Super friendly and helps me relax. I get anxiety in those situations without any real cause. I just get really nervous. It's crazy how differently cops can handle the situation in the exact same circumstances. Just one was nicer, or trained better. I've only had one bad instance with a cop who was convinced I was up to no good. He asked me what I was doing, and I told him. He asked me why I took a specific exit before my destination, and I mentioned I needed gas. He said, "Well, you've got an answer for everything, don't you?" Yes, sir, it's not that difficult when it's the truth. He ended up having me wait outside the car for half an hour while he went over it with a canine unit after I refused to let him search. I didn't want to have to reorganize everything after he rummaged through it. I had nothing to hide. Then when the dog found nothing, he searched the car anyway because I seemed nervous because I was sweating, after standing in the Texas sun in August for 30 minutes. I filed a complaint and was pretty much told, "Too bad, our officers are risking our lives for you every day, and people shouldn't be questioning their authority." Cop here. Assuming this is on a traffic stop, for the most part, if you're acting jumpy, I try to figure out why and remove that stress. If I can't figure it out on my own, I'll simply ask. Common answers are, I don't like cops, I don't want a ticket, and so on. My reasoning for this is if you're relaxed and I ask if there are any weapons in the car and your stress indicators skyrocket when you say no, something's wrong. If you're already stressed, I won't be able to see that reaction. As others have stated, it's not 100%, some people are just nervous Nellies. I try to calm people down for their sanity and my safety, but it doesn't always work. I have anxiety. Every time a copper pulls me over, I look guilty. But really, I'm scared of unwarranted police violence and nervous about how much money today's ticket will cost me. Police always notice and they always say that makes me suspicious, so they have reason to ask to search me and my possessions. I feel like I can't be the only innocent person in the world who gets the jumps around police, but they always act like I'm the first person they've ever encountered who acts guilty when I haven't actually done anything. Every time I get pulled over, as soon as my tag is run through the system, the police get on their bullhorn and tell me to get out and lay on the ground. Not because I'm black, because I'm a 2-time convicted felon, been crime-free for 6 years. But I always find it amusing, and after all the foolishness, I always have a laugh with them. Duval, Florida, by the way. Well, your attitude to it is bafflingly positive. I can't imagine many people would react that positively to what you make sound like a semi-regular public spectacle of yourself. Police instructor here. You look for what is out of place or context. Everyone is looking at an event or certain direction, and that one person is staring at you or in the complete opposite direction. That's the oddball. People draw attention to themselves by behavior that is different from the environment, or expected of the environment they're in. It's how they identified the Boston bombers. Everyone was looking in the direction of the explosion, but the brothers were staring in the opposite direction. Suspicious behavior. This technique can be applied to clothing as well. If it's summer and you see people wearing heavy jackets, there's something odd. Somebody keeps tapping the waistline and there's no reason for him to do that, like something falling off it, and there's something tucked into their waistline, like substances or weapons. Now, not saying this gives you an excuse to go up and start frisking people, however, it definitely lets you narrow down the focus of your attention for what is out of place. Cops once woke me up at 3 a.m. in the morning because my neighbor saw flashlights in the woods next to my house. Then they started questioning me, asking why I seemed so nervous, and if I wasn't doing anything, why were there footprints in the snow in front of my fricking front door? I was a 19-year-old living on my own in a small town, so small it didn't have a population. I just remember being absolutely flabbergasted at why they'd want to know why someone might be nervous from getting a visit from the cops in the middle of the night, and why they thought footprints in a heavily traveled area was suspicious. I basically told them some variation of that and then told them they were welcome to look around outside if they wanted before they left. This was during deer hunting season in Wisconsin, so the only thing I could think of is that maybe they thought there was some poaching going on. Still, it showed a remarkable detachment from reality that they couldn't understand why I was so nervous to begin with. I had a similar incident. Dead asleep, woken up by police pounding on the door. This is before cell phones, so naturally, my now ex-husband and I woke up and ran downstairs. Cue the police shining a light in our faces, and the first thing they said was, "Oh, let me guess, you just woke up. How convenient." So the ex and I were like, yeah, we did. What's going on? The cop says our car was involved in a hit and run of several cars. A friend of ours was staying over a few nights. We motioned behind us to the couch where he was sleeping to the cops, who come in. Dude is in his shoes and yet he's sweating. So, yeah. Thanks for assuming, dudes. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Actual police officer here. There really is no magic answer. There's a ton of overlap between both groups, and anyone who says they can consistently spot the difference is lying to you. I'd rather judge the situation based on the objective facts rather than my gut feeling. Not long after I got my license, I was driving around, and at a stoplight there was a cop behind me. I hadn't done anything wrong. Cops at that point didn't freak me out yet, and I even knew a kid in school who was planning to become one. The lights turn green, and I go. I notice behind me everyone is behind the cop on all lanes. It weirded me out. Usually, there are cars passing me or next to me. People were giving the cop a nice wide berth, or at least not wanting to drive ahead of it. It made me feel paranoid and I checked my speed. I was actually going slower than the speed limit. After I figured out everyone was just being paranoid, I sped up to the speed limit, and that was that. The cop was driving slower than the speed limit, and I drove off, leaving them all behind. I feel like the cop probably thought it was hilarious that his presence was slowing down traffic, because it wasn't like he was trying to control it, his lights weren't on. Since then, I've had plenty of speeding tickets. Plenty. But not on that day. Cops freak me out now too. Every time I see one, I go, oh crap, speed limit? I'm okay. Car functioning right? Yes. Substances in the car? Wait, no, don't do substances. It's a tense situation. Not a cop, but having worked in a pawn shop, I'll say they talk way too much. When the customer was trying to pull something on us, most would talk a lot about nothing, keep up a constant stream of chatter. Of course, this is in no way a 100% indicator, but it was one sign we looked for. Liars will usually offer additional explanations and excuses for something even when you don't ask, mostly because they assume you'll doubt what they'll say and feel the need to back up their claims. Just imagine that a friend is late and he says, "Oh, sorry, I forgot," and move on. That's probably true because he didn't even consider for a moment you might doubt that. That same friend shows up late but then starts explaining in detail why they're late and add more and more details to that story even though you didn't ask. They might be making crap up and trying to present a more finite, flawless story. And of course, this only applies to bad liars. Duh, of course. Tips for spotting obvious liars only apply to people who didn't perfect the art. Not a cop, but I'm a Florida native and am usually dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. I was in a flyover state for a concert and was supposed to pick someone up about 4 hours away in the morning. Instead of getting a hotel for 5 hours, I decided to drive to my destination and sleep in the back of the rental car. Usually when I do this, I roll the windows down and sleep with the car off, but it was in the mid-30s this night. I pull into the vacant parking lot next to a vacant building outside of town. Turns out I was still in city limits. I tried to turn the lights off but wasn't able to. This eventually attracted the attention of the local law enforcement. I woke to a flashlight banging on my window. They, all 9 of them, wanted me out of the car while they tried to figure out what was going on. Being as it was cold, I started to shake. I shared how I thought it was amusing that I was shaking and that it would likely raise suspicion. The cop that was babysitting me at that moment said, "No, it's cold out." She then let me get into the car and started again. 9 out of 10 would recommend. I got pulled over for a DUI stop at 2:30 in the morning in the middle of March. I was just leaving work, so I didn't really have a proper attire to be standing outside for long periods of time. I'd not been drinking and showed no evidence of it at all. I got pulled over for swerving when I went to reach for my water bottle that fell on the floor, but the cop proceeded to keep me outside of my car, doing all of the sobriety tests for about an hour while I was shivering and my teeth were chattering. It was close to 3:30 when he finally realized I wasn't impaired. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. Thank you both for your respective ratings. They were very helpful in working out whether you did or did not enjoy your respective inconveniences. 8 out of 10 would read again. There's a bit in Bryan Cranston's book where he talks about his time as a security guard. His talent was spotting about-to-be shoplifters. His advice? People come into stores because they want something specific. In and out. Watch for the lingerers. Must be rough around Christmas time. Sorry, security guards, I have no clue what to get my mom. UK veteran and ex-Metropolitan Police, here, just found it's all down to experience when reading people. Your mentor is everything and should be a wealth of knowledge. Learn from them. Also, the weirdos tend to be regulars, and someone will know them and tell you all you need to know. The regulars will be in an Intel database somewhere, so any safety issues should be made aware of for you to control. This includes known aliases. I don't put much consideration on someone's nervousness to the likeliness of them committing a crime. We need reasons or probable cause to determine that. However, someone's jumpiness is a tactical cue to me that they may more likely run or fight, especially if I already have probable cause of a crime occurring. Most people are more scared when stopped by the police, but this fear is different than jumpiness. Fear is a little more subdued than the tension of someone looking for an escape. Another consideration is that if someone suffers from a mental illness, their symptoms are usually clearly different than someone who is plain scared or jumpy. Also, someone who is affected by substances clearly has distinct signs. It's pretty complicated to explain, but simple when observing it in person every day. Ex-cop, still licensed if that matters. You can't always tell. That's why treating everyone as close to the same as possible is important. The average person will change their behavior around a police officer at least a little bit. It can be weird, over-respectful type deal, or they might shut down completely. The average criminal acts nearly the same. However, that's why it's important to be very aware of the person's movements and responses to questions or your own movements. If you ask a person with substances in the car, "Do you have substances in the car?" his eyes will very commonly dart toward where he or she is hiding something, even if it's not substances. That, of course, doesn't give me probable cause to tear their car apart looking for stuff. It's just a red flag. A person who is simply nervous and is not really guilty of a crime will most likely just break eye contact and look somewhere else, such as out of the window, behind you, down at the wheel, among a few other places. Same goes for a person you may simply be suspicious of on the street. Are you carrying any weapons? Will lead to a person carrying a weapon to often touch the area where it is, usually repeatedly, or start to look at where they have hidden a weapon. A person who's just nervous probably won't grab their waistband several times after that question. That is just one example, but it shows the importance of communication. Being aware of the surroundings and subject, and why asking questions is very important. All because a person who's simply nervous and a criminal who is nervous are almost indistinguishable without some digging. As for people who appear totally 100% calm, well, that in and of itself can be a red flag as well. Maybe he or she is calm because they like police. Maybe they are police in a different area. Maybe they really have nothing to hide and a good understanding of police procedures. Or they're a hardened criminal that has no sense of remorse or anxiety over meeting a cop. You never know unless you start to look deeper. So to anyone who feels like cops hate you or are mean, maybe that sheds a bit of light on things. I'm a cop in Arizona. It's important to know the cultural and societal norms of your patrol area. A huge amount of folks are packing heat here, for example. Your average law-abiding citizen will generally use a holster and not be deceptive about the weapon. Bad guys will not be forthcoming. We have some issues with Mexican cartels, and they tend to blend in somewhat, but have weapons in unique calibers, such as .38 Supers. Since we do have a huge Hispanic community, it helps to know the norms of their behavior, which differ somewhat from the white community. A vast majority of the time we'll be dealing with people while investigating specific crimes. There's a huge variety of factors involved in that, but generally speaking, you're going to use 4 of your senses to make educated guesses: sight, smell, touch, and sound. A person whose voice wavers may just be afraid of cops. Combine that with an odor of substances, or a suspicious protrusion on their body, then there could be an issue. White cultural knowledge is important. There are some universal signs of deception, which you could probably recognize. I spent a year in Afghanistan doing police work as well, and those principles held true there too. To a degree, it's profiling, which is a dirty word but a pragmatic principle. I never feel I act normal around cops. Funny thing is, I have 2 close relatives who are cops. When I act normal around them, they tell me I should respect that they're cops. Sorry, does this illegal activity that we're both participating in bother you all of a sudden? I got a family member who's been a cop since the 80s, basically the Stone Age. He gets nervous when the cops are behind him. Cops can't even tell if they're in the right house. Smart people rarely become cops. In fact, I've known people who failed the entrance tests for getting too high a score. You shoot them all and let God sort them out. Seriously though, my uncle is a sheriff and he said one of the biggest giveaways is people who try to be subtle but their actions are completely different from someone who has nothing to hide. For example, if they're busting up a party, an underage drinker will nearly immediately set their drink down and push it away about 6 inches after they set it down. The pushing away isn't something you normally do. Everyone is different, but usually the nervous people will be polite and apologetic. Suspicious people will be more agitated and annoyed. Young black man here. I was approached by an officer at a bus stop because of my suspicious behavior. Among 7 other people, I was the only black. I was nervous looking at my watch and in the direction of the bus that I wanted to come through because I was late for work, which was the direction where the cop came from. By the looks of it, probably thought that I was nervous because of his presence. The cop got jumpy, hand on his holster, and forced me to show my ID and backpack for suspicious or things that would compromise me. Didn't even bother to see that the other commuters were talking about the late bus out loud. What's the most messed up thing that you've eavesdropped? I was a kid, maybe 10-ish, and I was homesick from school one day. My dad left my door ajar to hear me in case I started hurling. He thought I was asleep, but I could hear him talking to his best male friend at the time, out in our family room. Dad's friend was telling him about how he cheated on his wife and how good it was. And he asked my dad if he ever cheated on my mum. Even at that age, I knew it was wrong, and my heart raced as I listened for his answer. To this day, I'm in my 30s, I'm very proud of my dad for saying, "No, I had a chance to. My brother's wife put her hand between my legs, but I shoved her away. You know I love my mum's name. I never did tell anyone about that. My parents are still together." First off, I wear hearing aids. When I was in elementary school, I had a mic that was on a necklace and my teacher would wear it. It would transmit to my hearing aid. Anyway, she was talking about her weekend out drinking and sleeping with strangers. It was worse when she realized that she'd left the mic on. This is some sitcom level crap. My daughter is hearing impaired. Similar thing happened to her, except the teacher was talking to another teacher about Christmas presents for her daughter. Same age as mine. When her teacher returned to the classroom, my daughter whispered in her ear, "I think she'll like that." When I was a little kid, like 5 years old, I really wanted this stupid stamp set in the Family Dollar. My mum and I walked in there for her to buy tampons. We found both in the clearance bin. I overheard her talking to the lady at the cash register when price-checking the items about how she only had money for one of the items and that she was going to buy me the stamp set over the tampons that she needed. I'm 21 now and I never told my mum that I heard that. She always pretended that we had enough money, but she would skip meals or give up her stuff to make sure we had enough. And it breaks my heart to think about it. I know it's not super messed up, but still. My husband and I were at McDonald's. We took our son to the play place to try and let him burn off some energy so he could finish grocery shopping. A mother was in there with her 3 kids. One by one, she would make each one of them sit down and was interrogating them. Where was your dad sat at the spring concert? Who did he sit by? Did he talk to any of the other moms? Was he laughing and smiling when he talked to Carter's mom? Did you guys come home right afterwards? She was writing it all down. Each child was not allowed to go play unless they answered her questions. What the frick? How to Weaponize Your Children in a Divorce, a step-by-step guide proudly written by McDonald's playground woman. Gross! I was listening to 2 of my kindergarten students talk about Christmas the day before break. One asked, "Do you believe in Santa?" And the other replied, "Yeah, but he doesn't come to my house because I'm in foster care." I was fixing a woman's computer when she got the phone call that her mother had suddenly passed away. She went from powerful executive assistant to fragile little girl in 3 seconds. It was heartbreaking. That's rough. I was once at a conference as like a junior marketing whatever, and me and my boss were in a hotel lobby about to meet with a big deal manager from another company to talk about a deal, when he took a call from his wife. She said there was a soldier outside her house with important news that could only be conveyed in person. She wouldn't talk to the guy because she knew what the news would be. Their son was in Iraq. His wife handed her phone to the guy in uniform on their doorstep. "I'm 500 miles away right now. Do you have something important to tell me about my son?" And then he looked at us and said he had to go home and walked away. I've been bitten in the nuts by 2 separate Scottish terriers. I've never wanted to chase someone down the street and ask to hear the rest of the story so bad in my life. Worked at a summer camp for a few years, and I'm convinced kids don't realize you can hear them even when you're in the same room literally 3 feet away unless you're looking directly at them. Best conversation I've ever heard was between 2 9-year-olds. Kid 1, "My brother is totally going through puberty and he's only 11. Kid 2, "Aw, lucky. I know, he even has armpit hair." If I had armpit hair, I'd shave it off and glue it on my face. That's a great idea. I was flabbergasted. I don't know if this qualifies, but it should. I was a photographer at a wedding, and while the bride was getting ready, I heard two bridesmaids, mid-20s, talking. One said to the other about how she recently found out that beans, probably as in the baked variety, were not bits of potato as she had always thought. They're fricking beans. When I read this, I thought it would be the stereotypical "she screwed the best man" or something like that. I'm kinda pleased with the outcome here. I was at Disney in high school, and I heard a guy say to someone, "You're tiggity, but ain't good enough to eat, so put your shoes back on." I'm 35 and still have no idea what that meant. Not so much messed up, just sad. Around 2004 or 2005, I was at a meeting. During a bathroom break, I heard two men talking. One of them had a brother who was killed in the September 11th attack on the Pentagon. Shortly after the attack, the brother's widow gave birth to their second child. A year or so later, the mother died of a terminal illness. The man speaking adopted his brother's kids. He and his wife had never planned on having kids, but they stepped up to raise them. It was a big adjustment, but he loved the kids and was doing the best that he could for them. When the police showed up at my door to tell me that my upstairs neighbor was dead, I heard the EMTs say, "We're gonna have to double bag him." Then I heard my neighbor's double-bagged body being dragged down the narrow staircase because a stretcher wouldn't fit him. Thump, thump, thump. For what it's worth, the EMTs and police were also upset about having to do that. I picked up the house phone to find a conversation already in progress. And that's how I learned my stepdad was having an affair with his brother's wife. As a 14-year-old super shy busboy at a restaurant in my hometown, terrified of the early 20s waitresses, setting up a banquet while the waitresses were chatting in the kitchen with the door open, I overheard the following. "What do you think of that new kid? Is he all right in the head or something? Ah, I think he's cute. Maybe he's just slow." Took a few years to get over that one. A bunch of junkies planning on how they're going to rob someone for money to get their next hit. I got out of there real fast. My brother overheard my dad telling Mum he wished that I had gone to Vietnam. That put at least 10 layers of security between us for more than 10 years. One co-worker to another as I walked in. "I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't like black people. I just don't think I could join the Klan." Oh God. Moments ago I was telling a likely former friend that he'd surpassed his quota of saying, "I'm not a racist, but." And now I come across, "I'm a racist, but." And I think I've interneted enough today. 2 points. Firstly, good on the latter person for calling out their coworker. Also, holy crap, where in the US was that first story from? And if you're already an admitted racist, what was your reason for not joining? The fricking membership payments? When I was 10 or 11, I overheard my stepmom talking to my friend's mum about my puppy that had recently disappeared. I learned the puppy had not run away, but that my stepmom had drove it to the middle of nowhere and, I quote, "set it free because she didn't want to have a puppy in the house." For those of you asking about my stepmom, she's literally the worst human being I've ever met. It's worth mentioning that she's got rid of my possessions before without asking, giving my clothes or toys to Goodwill while I was at school. I've asked her a few times about what really happened, and I gave her the opportunity to come clean, but she's always evasive about the whole thing. She'll eventually get what's coming to her. I hope she suffers as much as possible in her life and dies painfully. I caught my dad choking his chicken when I was in high school. I woke up really early and went to get a drink. I walked down the stairs and saw the TV was on and playing one of those commercials for Girls Gone Wild. I looked at the couch and my dad was just sitting there jerking it. But he didn't notice me because my dad was quite old and had bad hearing. I don't know if he saw me, but I rushed to the bathroom and stayed quiet in the dark until I thought he was finished. I felt bad for him and wanted him to at least get it done. Best single dad in the world, and I miss him, and I always laugh at that memory. I was a waitress, and I just took an order from a table of students that were all older than 18. One of them seemed pretty dim with their questions they were asking me, but nothing too stupid. One of her friends ordered duck gyoza. As I walked away, I heard her ask her friends what a duck was, and them start to explain. How the hell do you get to be over 18 and not know what a fricking duck is? My brother breaking up with his girlfriend. I learned from their conversation that they used latex protection for doing the deed, even though she was pretty allergic. The thing is, she didn't tell my brother this until they were on a break. And they were at it all the time. She would hide her infections and such from him for whatever reason. My dad's girlfriend is a special education teacher. I heard her telling my dad about a student she had with Down's syndrome. The kid had pretty crappy parents and lived in the rough part of town. Anyways, he never brushed his teeth, and as a result, his teeth were rotting and he had to get them all pulled. He was given pain medication, but his mother ended up taking all the pills herself. The boy would be in so much pain in class that he would have to be taken out of class because he couldn't stop yelling. He yelled so much that the stitches in his mouth ultimately ripped. As far as I know, the boy still lives with his mother. I don't know why nothing was done about this. It makes me angry. She did report it, but for some reason or another, the mother still has custody. She didn't go into it much and acted as though it wasn't something she wanted to talk about, so I didn't ask further questions. I overheard my wife say, "You look really handsome, babe." She was on a FaceTime call with the guy she was cheating on me with and didn't hear me come in early from work. Still the hardest thing I've ever heard. I listened in the hallway for a few minutes and then packed a bag and left. 10 years of marriage and we have a 2-year-old. It's pretty insane. I moved out and divorce is final in October. She moved in with him. Life's rough sometimes. It'll get better, I hope. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I work from home for a company based in Los Angeles, and each morning my engineering team convenes for a meeting. The new guy forgot to mute his headset, and we all tortuously ignored him, tickling his pickle for 5 minutes. Our meeting was like, yeah, so I committed those changes to and today I'll be working on changes to the mobile report. I should mention that if someone is talking or driving or whatever in the background, we always let them know if they need to go on mute. In this case, though, 15 people sat on the phone and talked over him. I'm not sure if it was a lack of guts or if we just didn't have the heart to embarrass him, but there was no mistaking what we heard. Sat on a bus home from work a couple of years back. An attractive young lady, blonde, in her 20s and dressed in smart business gear, got on and took a seat. If you'd seen the state of the bus, usually you'd understand why she caught my attention. Anyway, she picks up the phone and starts having a full conversation. It was the biggest 180 on a first impression I've ever had. Starts talking about her 2 kids who got taken into care because her and her ex couldn't stop beating each other up. The cracker of a quote was, "I'm not even sure they'll let me keep the one inside me yet." All this was a soundtrack to a silent bus. Not really eavesdropping when it's so in your face, but shocking all the same as this fairly normal 20-something revealed her openly mental home life. Let's hope that it was made up and intentionally loud to keep the possibility of unwanted suitors away. I was sitting next to a cutesy couple in 10th grade English class and I saw her mouth the words, "I'm pregnant." I can see the plane crash going on through his eyes. I'm sure I've heard worse, but my memory is that of a goldfish. And in case you're wondering, they did have a happy ending. They moved in with each other down at their families in Idaho or Ohio or something, and they were very sweet people. Also, I took an extra English class and they doubled up on English that year. Our high school worked with 4 periods per semester with different classes. So it was technically an 11th grade English class and they were seniors. Sorry I didn't include it, so it's not as bad. But there was already a 10th grader with a 1.5-year-old, or in new mother language, 18-month-old, so it wouldn't be surprising to me if they were actually 10th graders. I woke up around midnight on Easter when I was about 6 to hopefully get a glimpse of the Easter Bunny, only to hear my mum crying to my dad on the phone, divorced, to come and get my brother and I because she has no money to get us any chocolate. She was hysterical. I went back to bed and pretended to be surprised when my dad was there in the morning to come and get us. He told us that the Easter Bunny got mixed up about what house we were going to be at. Props to your mum for asking for help when she needed it, and props to your dad for giving the correct answer. Yep, although we don't know what the full story was here, there's at least a small uplifting show of co-parenting after a divorce. I was at a music festival a few years back, asleep in the tent at about 9:30 a.m., and I woke up to 2 guys speaking in panicked voices outside the tent, saying, "I know we gave him the pills, but it wasn't our fault he took them. It's not our fault. We brought him to the first aid tent. What more could we do?" and more to that effect. They also said that they'd written on his arm that he'd taken 5 pills and dropped him at the first aid tent. As soon as I heard them leave, I stuck my head out of the tent to see my best friend with her head out of her tent, both of us wondering what the frick that was about. Then we found a bag of white powder and about 25 pills in baggies, which these guys had just dropped to get rid of any evidence. Maybe an hour later, we heard that someone had died at the festival from taking 5 pills and overdosing. The penny dropped as we joined the dots between the conversation we'd overheard, the discarded substances, and the death. Very creepy. Was once walking behind 2 really good-looking girls in the street and heard one of them say to the other, "I was so constipated yesterday, I just wanted to get it out with an ice cream scooper." My mother recently said she'd been constipated so long it felt like she had appendicitis, and she practically needed a jackhammer to get the crap out of me. Thanks for that, Mum. Once I got a ride in the casual commute lane with 2 women in a gold Mercedes. I sat in the back while they carried on with their conversation. They spent about 10 minutes talking about a friend of theirs who was looking so great after she had lost a ton of weight. After a pause, one of them said, "Well, it's too bad about the cancer." 3 girls were together at a bus stop. I was behind them. One was telling a story as the others listened. Girl number 1, "She called me a dirty, lying hussy and she threw her bottle at me, and it shattered on the wall, nearly hitting me." "Oh my god, for real? Really?" "Yeah. Then I told her to F off and choke on an eggplant before I slammed the door and left." "Oh my god, what a B-word." "I know, right? That's the last time I go to visit my aunt during withdrawals." My boss screwing the secretary in the break room. Did they not realize that you were still there, or did they not care? This morning, my brother overheard 2 schoolboys talking about Chloe refusing to do hand stuff to Jake, so Jake asked her friend instead. Heard this conversation at my dining hall. "Don't eat fries that you dropped on the floor, that's disgusting." "Sarah, I've literally had my tongue in your butthole. I think I'm fine." About 11 years ago, at high school, one of my friends found her father hung in the backyard. They were a really nice family and he was a great guy too. They had these cafes at libraries and the food was great. But his wife had an affair with her personal trainer and probably he knew. And if I recall correctly, they had some financial issues as well. He arranged his clothes for the next day as he did every day. It was a shock for everyone. We were in the middle of a class when we discovered it. We gathered ourselves in the school's coordinator and after some discussion, he let us leave early to support our friend. She was in shock, complete disbelief, wasn't even crying. The funeral was arranged for the next day. His family flew in from another state to say their last goodbyes. It was scheduled to 3 p.m., and after the priest's speech, he avoided any hell citation for some reason and just said something about disturbed souls and their path to heaven. Then they started burying him, and the widow starts to cry really hard. Then I overheard one of his relatives, probably the guy's sister, "What the frick does she think she's doing? She killed him. Oh my god, I hate her so much." It's not as messed up as others' comments, but the suffering and hate mixed together made this day really unforgettable. A very young girl gave her mother a picture she drew as a gift while on public transportation. The mother then rudely rejected the gift. That made me quite sad. "I only had her so I didn't have to go to work," said my mother about my younger sister. Turns out that as I got old enough to need less supervision, my mother realized that she'd suddenly be expected to actually make financial contributions like a normal person. That clearly wasn't for her, so she accidentally got pregante again. Took me a long time to realize what I'd actually heard. I'm aware she's a scumbag, and this is just one example of how. We no longer speak, and a decade after making that decision, I'm still glad of it. College dining hall. Me and my best friends, 5 or 6 of us maybe, heard a boy at the next table start to brag about something. He's clearly an upper-class man, older than 21, so while it could have been a party, it wasn't likely, so we started to eavesdrop. Little by little, we're just getting angrier and angrier. He's bragging on about how he adopted this kitten and tortured it to death. His buddy has got it all on camera, just going on and on about what he did to this poor animal. My buddy is a huge cat lover and we basically had to restrain him. Reports were filed and the phone was seized. One nice twist to the story, though, is that the cat torturer was caught and an unspeakable act offender was also caught. How, you might ask? Yeah, the cameraman had taken phone videos of himself roofying and performing the unspeakable act on girls at a local bar. So 2 criminals were caught, I guess. Overheard the end of a conversation that completed with a very large, emo, gay Mexican boy telling an incredibly skinny girl, "And then I said to her, 'That's the bed I did your brother in,' and I slapped her in the face." If you were in a restaurant next to those 2, the rules of comedy dictate that you had to abruptly shout, "Check please," and hightail it out of there. When I was 16, I served a customer who was switching between ordering food with me and organizing for somebody to go and beat up a guy for hitting a significant female in his life. Once overheard a few people talking about kidnaps on my work. They were talking about doing it. I work in a restaurant in Brazil, and they were 4 guys talking about kidnapping someone. They were deadly serious. I overheard them enough through a thin wall. The worst part? They were cops. They still come to eat here from time to time and are notoriously dirty. One of them has a $500,000 car, while getting less than $2,000 per month. I never did anything about it. Who would I call? The other dirty cops? It's not creepy if you go into her locker and check her timetable. Yes, Chuck, it really is creepy. I was traveling with a friend through Honduras, and in the hostel we were staying at, we met this cool Aussie lesbian. One morning they were chatting right next to me as I woke up, but I didn't immediately get up and start talking. I realized they were talking about me. My friend, who I'd known for a few years and had a friend with benefits thing with in the past, was telling her that she thought I was transgender. I'm not. It was really strange to hear someone tell an almost complete stranger her opinion about my personal gender identity. I was at a 24-hour diner and breakfast joint in DC on a Sunday. A guy and 2 trashy-looking women at the counter next to us were planning out an adult film shoot. Not joking about it or anything, like it was all set and they were just figuring out some details. One time my mom told me to text my dad about something. I completely forgot what it was, and I just saw a crap ton of dirty messages. Rest in peace, soul and innocence. In a weird sort of way, this makes me happiest of all the responses. Everyone else is talking about terrible things happening and weird crap going on, but this one still shows parents keeping it spicy in a modern way, even after having kids. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.